Chapter 27-26. Seek her salve where she gets her sore for. Difui took her hand and dived right in. Let's go and have a look. Difui was at the peak of his kung fu and spiritual power prowess, so diving into the sea was no longer a problem for him. Meanwhile, Gushijio stayed within the wizardry barrier that he had created, and did not get wet at all. The crystal palace still looked the same. It was as majestic and ethereal as ever. Difui and Gushijio walked into the crystal palace hand in hand. Little stones of amber and jade paved their way in. Soon, they came across a big stone that was carved all over with Difui's name. Every stroke of every word was so deeply carved onto the solid surface, which clearly showed how anxious she was when she made those marks. She was desperate to make the words stay. You made those marks, didn't you? Difui asked. Gushijio cleared her throat before responding. Your names would always disappear right after I carved them. I refused to believe it, so I frantically carved every surface that I could find, but none of them lasted. Now they are here. In fact, they are all over the place. She described it with a calm face, but deep down, a myriad of thoughts filled her heart. Difui held her hand and said, Tell me the details. Share everything with me. I want to know what happened after I was immortalized. Gushijio was a little reluctant. Those were the times that she did not want to relive. However, since Difui looked serious about his question, she decided to comply and shared her side of the story. She thought that she would be overwhelmed by sadness when she talked about the painful past, but the way he wrapped his arm around her made her feel better. He was trying to prove to her that no matter how bad the past might have been, he was here with her now in the present. She sighed with emotions when she revisited her old haunts, but she was not as profoundly affected as she thought she would be. His undivided attention made her feel like talking more and more. Slowly, they entered the gardens and saw a phrase that filled the entire place. Dngyo forever. Some were written neatly. Others were just words scribbled in different sizes and fonts. These carvings filled every surface that one could possibly find. It was easy to picture how desperate she must have been. This unsynchronized mess ruined the view of the gardens for any ordinary passerby, but not to Difui. He cherished every little carving that he found along the way. Gushijio was noticeably a little embarrassed. I could not make your name stay, but these phrases did, so I kept carving and carving. I woke up the next day feeling defeated by the heavenly law and ended up losing all memory of you. When I first saw these phrases, I thought I was crazy. The master of heavenly law is such a bastard. Difui could not help but curse. Gushijio wanted to remind him not to scold himself, but she was not allowed to spill the heavenly secret. Quietly, she swallowed her words and acted normally. After the talk, she found herself to be quite relieved. For the first time, she felt as if her sense of melancholy and yearning had fizzled out. Perhaps, there was a sense of closure to it all. Difui saw the change in her expression, and was convinced that she had just defeated the trauma. He believed that the best way to recover from trauma was to face it. The more she tried to suppress her feelings, the more she was going to suffer. Therefore, a good long talk was the key to releasing the deeply distressing experiences that she had been keeping in her heart for too long. Relieved, he sat her down on a chair while he went away to catch some fish. Chapter 27-27. Seek her salve where she gets her sore 5. His kind gesture touched Gushijio, so she decided to roll up her sleeves and join him. Let me do it. The fish that she requested was a very rare find, so it would be best if he did not ruin it with his inexperience. Therefore, both of them worked together and prepared the entire meal that mainly consisted of fish. Nonetheless, Gushijio was only a helper. He was still the chef for the night. To Guzijia's surprise, the food that Difui had prepared was unexpectedly good. Gushijio found herself filled with delicacies. After dinner, Difui sat down next to her on the chair, and the couple watched the night sky together. Gushijio was surprised to notice that the star chart was vastly different from the one that she observed before. Perhaps, a major incident had changed everything that she knew about the stars. In fact, it no longer made any sense to Gushijio. Difui noticed her bafflement and tried to explain the situation to her. Shijio, the stars that we once saw were the ones that portrayed the fate of the starry crescent land. However, The chart that we are looking at now is the whole picture of every star that is present in the sky. Gu Shijiu finally understood why it did not make any sense to her. The chart that she was familiar with was probably solely restricted to the solar system. Perhaps, she was now looking at the fate of the entire galaxy. That also explained why she failed to find the star that represented her fate. She took a quick look at Difui and wondered what he was thinking of at that time. The place was created entirely by him, so it was only natural that the things that they were looking at now had changed according to his field of vision. If the entire star chart of the universe was displayed right here, could it be that he was already on the verge of recovering his identity as the master of heavenly law? If he did, would he still be the same man that she used to know? Understandably, Gu Shijiu was a little preoccupied with her thoughts and did not hear a thing that Difui tried to tell her about the stars and their features. Difui had to shake his hand in front of her eyes to catch her attention. "Baby, time to come back. What were you thinking of this time?" Gu Shijiu finally recovered from her preoccupation and caught Difui looking at her with a spurious smile. Without much thought, she said the first thing came into her head. "I did not ask to learn this. You forced me to learn the star chart because you wanted me to take over your role as the Lord before you were immortalized. Why are you teaching me this right now? Are you trying to pass me the heavenly?" She realized the mistake and quickly stopped talking. Difui seemed puzzled. She could not make up her mind about what she was trying to say, so she looked at him with a long pause, while trying to make up a legitimate excuse. "Did you receive any bad messages from the heavenly law this time? Are you trying to pass me your role again?" Still slightly puzzled, Difui rubbed her hair and said, "You are overthinking. I do not have any role to pass on to you. Now that I think of it, I actually have one role. I am now the husband of the Lord. Shall I pass the role to you?" He managed to tickle Gu Shijiu with the joke. "You and your sweet talk. If you have nothing to offer to me, why are you telling me about the star chart?" "Silly. I am simply sharing the knowledge with you. In fact, this is the first time I am looking at it." At this point, he started to have some doubts. If this was his first time looking at the chart, why did it feel so familiar to him? He was even able to read the star signs without being taught. Between him and Fan Qianshi, he could not decide which one of them was the master of heavenly law. He had always doubted that he could be the master of heavenly law until Fan Qianshi showed up. After all, Fan Qianshi's kung fu was beyond Difui's level of understanding. Hence, it made sense for Fan Qianshi to be the master of heavenly law because of his powerful strength and ability to control many things at once. However, he changed his mind a little after he realized that he could read the star chart without any foundation or reason. But, if he was the master of heavenly law, what was Fan Qianshi's role? Chapter 27-28. I trust you. After some small talk, Difui was concerned that Gu Shijiu might be having a hard time digesting the food while sitting down, so he pulled her up and went for another walk with her. Gu Shijiu saw the words that filled another part of the gardens and was quite embarrassed. "Fui is gone along with everything else," she wrote. Her desperate remarks spoiled the entire view of the gardens. She quietly rolled up her sleeves and performed a spell to wipe away the words along their walk. Deep down, she wanted to restore the place to its original beauty. Wiping away these words also made her feel better. It was like getting rid of her past anxieties and exasperation in one go. Stealthily, Gu Shijiu tried to remove the marks without Difui knowing. Difui had nothing against it. He only held her hand and walked the path together as if nothing was happening. As they continued walking, one of the stones they passed had a carving that said, "Dianjiu forever." Difui immediately stopped her from removing it. "Keep this one." It was at that point that Gu Shijiu realized that Difui knew what she had been up to all this time. She looked up, only to find Difui's hand on her forehead. This is a good sign and should never be wiped away. However, you may wipe the phrase about how I was gone like everything else, because I will never be away from you ever again. Gu Shijiu was delighted by the last promise that he made to her. "I take that as a promise. If you abandon me again, I will surely take revenge this time." "Oh baby, why did you make it sound so serious? How do you plan on getting revenge exactly?" Gu Shijiu had to pause to think about the master plan, but realized that she would never hurt the man she dearly loved. She could not even find the courage to hurt his little finger. However, that did not mean that she could not hurt other people. After a while, she finally came up with a great plan. If you ever leave me again, I will become completely demonized, like a killing machine with no emotions. I will turn the entire world upside down. Difui was at a loss for words. He looked at her in astonishment, as he had never thought that she would make such a solemn statement with such serious consequences, which did not sound like her at all. Gu Shijie was shocked by the remark as well. Was there something wrong with her? There were many other ways that she could get her revenge. If they really had to be apart from one another again, there were always ways to help her forget about him. She could even descend to the underworld for a bowl of mengpa soup to forget all of her earthly existence. Therefore, her statement did not make much sense to Difui. Gu Shijie herself tried to shake the thought away. I was really worried that you might leave me alone again. I never meant any of those childish things that I just said to threaten you, she explained while gently patting his shoulder as a sign of comfort. Difui's heart sank a little. He found out from Di Hao that the boy already became an orphan not long after he was born. He did not have a good upbringing. Could what Gu Shijie just said be a prediction of their future tragedy? He took a deep breath and made a promise to himself that such a tragic ending should never happen to them. Then he pulled her into his arms and said, "Don't worry, you will never get the chance for your revenge. No matter what happens, I will always be by your side." Gu Shijie planted a soft kiss on his chin. "I know. I trust you." The topic was unusually awkward and somewhat ridiculous, so Gu Shijie decided to talk about something else. "What do you think about Fan Qianshi? I believe that he will not give up so easily. Someday he will come back to us again." "Of course. After spending so much effort on the plot, he surely will not let this go. If I am not mistaken, Long Fan must be one of his embodiments back in the day. Perhaps even the character of Zhu Duqing. He must have been the one behind the invasion from the people from the Blue Fox planet as well." "How do you know?" Difui showed her a book in his hand. The book has a record of some of the history of the great celestial master. He and his men first discovered the Starry Crescent land. He was also the one who made the rules and regulations for the Blue Fox family. He died of old age, eventually, and was buried. I sent someone to check the coffin, but it was empty. The members of the Blue Fox family are born with a unique characteristic that allows their skeletons to stay intact for more than 10,000 years. Chapter 27-29. I trust you too, Gu Shijie added. Do you mean to say that the plot began as early as 10,000 years ago? And that Fan Qianshi planted the Blue Fox family here all because of you? It seems like it. Difui nodded. There is something that bothers me, he continued while gently tapping on the table. Gu Shijie looked at him in bewilderment as she waited for him to continue. From what I have observed, Fan Qianshi's spiritual power and kung fu are both stronger and more powerful than mine. It should be very easy for him to take my life, or even tear my soul into pieces. Many options are far easier than this incredibly long plot, he explained. Also, he refused to fight me face to face and would rather run away as soon as he realized that his plan had failed. He did not even try to fight me. Don't you think that is a bit odd? It sounds odd, Gu Shijie agreed. Perhaps he is intimidated by your identity. Maybe he will be punished somehow if he were to harm you directly. Difui shook his head. We fought before. No amount of catastrophic punishment is enough to make him repay for what he has done to me. He certainly is not worried about the punishment. What else could it be then? Perhaps I have a greater and more powerful identity, which happens to be intimidating to him. Maybe there is no way that he can kill me. Perhaps my death will restore my powerful identity once more, which will be his bigger threat. He must be afraid that I will take my revenge once I am back to where I belong, so he has to stay in the dark and play dirty, so that I never find out who he really is. I believe that he is trying to find a way to destroy me for good, so I will not become who I really am. Gu Shijie remained quiet. She could not agree more with Difui's theory, but she could not say anything. Gu Shijie recalled her dream. Everything seemed blurry, but the Master of Heavenly Law and the Man in Black clearly made an impression on her. Could Fan Qianshi be the Man in Black? And was it possible that the Master of Heavenly Law would once again become powerful once his life came to an end? Death would never truly occur to him. Once he became who he really was, Fan Qianshi would never be able to defeat him. Therefore, Fan Qianshi chose to conceal his true identity, and would only disguise himself with other forms to help him blend in with Di Fui's surroundings. This was to keep him safe in the event that Di Fui remembered who he really was in the past. As for Di Fui's weakness, Fan Qianshi must be looking for something beyond the physical. Otherwise, he would have found it a long time ago. Gu Shijiu suddenly remembered about the video that Fan Qianshi showed her. She figured that some parts of the video must still be true. For example, the Master of Heavenly Law used to be a man who had no emotions and no regard for anyone by staying aloof from all worldly matters. Only without emotions could one be truly strong. He needed to be fair and square without any biases before he could secure his position as the Master of Heavenly Law. Since he could be so objective, his existence was too powerful and intimidating. There was nothing that could truly become his weakness. As the creator of the universe, Fan Qianshi had to create something to become Di Fui's weak spot, so he could regain his power. Could Gu Shijiu be the weak spot that Fan Qianshi had purposely created for Di Fui? Gu Shijiu shivered a little at the thought of the possibility. The Master of Heavenly Law was not allowed to fall in love with someone else, or he would have to surrender his power. If the video was true, then Fan Qianshi had already achieved his aim. However, something did not quite make sense. Di Fui had been in love with her since quite a long time ago. Why did Fan Qianshi even bother to take the role of Zhu Duqing and create more feuds? He only needed to wait patiently until Di Fui finally surrendered his power to him. There was no need to do so many unnecessary things like getting Little Fox pregnant with a demon. Chapter 2730. I trust you 3. In order to make Di Fui surrender his power, perhaps there was a lot more that needed to be done. It surely was not as simple as creating a trap for him to fall in love. Gu Shijiu could not help but look at Di Fui confusedly. Her heart was filled with a myriad of feelings. The man was the Master of Heavenly Law. No one would have known that the man would eventually fall for someone like her. Yet he loved her so much that he was willing to compromise on so many of his principles. Why are you looking at me like that? Di Fui noticed her odd gaze. He gently tapped on her head and asked, "Are you so obsessed with me?" He looked at her pridefully, for he was proud of his qualities as her perfect partner. Gu Shijiu made a sibilant sound as a sign of disapproval. Don't you feel embarrassed? You are feeling way too good about yourself. Di Fui laughed out loud and replied, I truly am a good man. Why should I underestimate my own qualities? You said that you might have a more powerful identity. With power comes responsibility. What if you are not allowed to fall in love with anyone at all? Gu Shijiu asked casually. I do not care a thing about fame or status, Di Fui answered casually. If there really is a conflict between power and love, I will give up the power. No matter what happens, I will never let you go. It is hard to say. In the video that Fan Qianshi played for me, you were portrayed as a despicable man. You chose to kill me in order to secure your power. She uttered and then stopped talking. All of a sudden, she realized that she might have spilled a heavenly secret, so she waited for a while to see if there was any catastrophic punishment, but there was none. Di Fui seemed interested. What video did he play for you? Was it about us? It was about all three of us, but I can tell that the scenes were mostly made up. There were too many loopholes that did not make any sense. I do not believe in any of those theories. Di Fui paused for a moment to think. May I have a look at the video? The video was played by using a piece of secret equipment on board the spaceship. I only remember the content, so there is no way I can play it again for you. I can tell you more about it if you want. Di Fui shook his head in disapproval. The video could be important. You might have missed out on some points. He gazed at her in contemplation. If you do not mind, may I read your mind to look into your memory about the video? Ah, do you know how to read one's mind? Yes. All right, go ahead then. Gu Shijiu agreed without hesitation. After a while, Di Fui finally let go of his hands from her forehead. His silence was a clear indication of how shocked he was after seeing what the video was about. He needed some time to process everything and make things clear. Meanwhile, Gu Shijie was starting to get tired. She had been feeling quite exhausted for the whole past month. Therefore, she decided to close her eyes for a short nap. She would talk to Difui later when she was more rested. To her surprise, the short nap turned out to be a long, deep sleep. When she woke up, it was already the next day. She found herself in a bedroom at the Biwu Palace, instead of the lazy chair in the garden. Needless to say, Difui must be the one who had brought her back. Difui was lying close by her side. He was looking at her intensely the moment she opened her eyes. What do you think about the video? Gu Shijie was not embarrassed to stare back at him. The video is helpful to me. With a smile, Difui took the video as a possible answer to many of his questions. Are you saying that the video is based on true events? Gu Shijie was puzzled. After much thought, I realized that a few things could be true. Gu Shijie was ready to listen with all her ears. First of all, our identities should be true. I am the master of heavenly law, while he is one of the creators of the universe. Secondly, he refuses to accept that I am the master of heavenly law, so he tried to get his hands on this power. Thirdly, as the master of heavenly law bears no weakness or biases, he has to create a disturbance, which is why you were created in the first place. The rest is just nonsense. I am not such an evil man. His theory made so much sense. Gu Shijie was relieved, but not entirely at ease. If you agree that he is the creator of the universe, do you also agree that you and I were both created by him? Difui expressed his disapproval. Although I remember nothing about my origin, my instincts clearly indicate that it is untrue. You too are not necessarily created by him. This video reminds me of the ancient story about how Pengu created the world for mankind, and how Nuwa Empress made human figurines out of clay. Also there was Fuxi, who created the laws to govern us. All three of them were the ancient gods. They were the ones who created the 6 worlds that made life possible. All of them were equally important, only with different tasks in nature. If I am not mistaken, Fan Qianshi was only pretending to play the role of Pengu by creating order in a messed-up world. He was not meant to control the heavenly law or to alter any regulations that were reinforced by the heavenly law. The heavenly law is just like Fuxi, one of the creators of the universe. Gu Shijie was astonished. So, am I the legendary Nuwa Empress? Chapter 27:31. She loved what he just said. Gu Shijie started to doubt herself. It does not sound right. Nuwa Empress knew how to make human figurines out of clay. She was the very ancestor of all mankind. I know nothing of that sort. In fact, Fan Qianshi is the one who knows how to make humans. The clones that he made are just examples. Difui gently rubbed her temples and said, Silly, that was only a metaphor. I was only describing the relationship between Fan Qianshi and I. I am not Fuxi, and he is not Pengu. As for Nuwa Empress, there is no sign of any connection between you and her. She only exists in folk tales. Gu Shijie fell back onto the bed. That is disappointing. I thought I could be more powerful and noble. Difui lay down by her side and pulled her into his arms. Just be yourself. There is only one of you. No one can ever replace you. Why should you care about having a different identity? She loved what he just said. Her broad smile clearly showed how happy she was at that remark. Actually, I only want to be your perfect match. But there is no denying that I wish I could be as mighty as Nuwa Empress. Delightfully, Difui answered. I don't like Nuwa. I only like Gu Shijie. His words melted her heart. Gu Shijie buried her head in his chest. Yes, I am your one and only, so are you to me. Regardless of your identity. The one thing I want for us is to be together forever. He could feel her warm breaths on his skin and her soft body in his arms. Aroused, his blood started boiling in excitement. They had not had sex ever since they were reunited. Each night, he had to suppress his sexual desires every time he held her in his arms. Their sweet exchange was also a cause of physical and mental suffering to him. He wanted to make love to her so badly. Nonetheless, she had just passed her first trimester, so it should be safe for them to have sex. He continued to gaze at her intensely. Playfully, His fingers slowly circled her waist tie, still deciding whether he should pull her robes open. Shijio, is it time? Gu Shijio looked up and caught the burning look in his eye. She could tell that he was aroused just from one look. She stammered a little. Her cheeks were already flushing crimson. Difui waited for a while, but she still had not answered his request. He thought that she was reluctant, and was slightly disappointed to learn that. It is all right. I can wait until the baby is finally here, he replied with a smile. With that in mind, he did not want to be on the bed anymore. He decided to go outside for a stroll, and calm himself down in isolation. To his surprise, Gu Shijio suddenly wrapped her arms tightly around his waist. Difui suddenly became motionless. He could feel her heat even through a layer of clothes. She said with involuntary pauses, "Actually, there is no need to wait. We just have to. I have to be careful." Difui's eyes glistened with excitement. He turned around and pulled her body into his embrace. Needless to say, both of them started panting in excitement. He kissed her lips softly and whispered, "I will be careful." They both felt a strong longing for each other. Finally, they were able to be free and express their love for one another. They started to get undressed, with all of the clothes sent across the air and folded tidily on the rack next to the bed. Behind the thin curtains, the man and the woman had been stripped naked. Intertwined, the couple was drenched in ecstasy, for making love was an instrument of romantic expression for their passionate love. Gu Shijio fell asleep. This time she was happy. She seemed relaxed and pleased. Difui sat against the wall. Troubled, he had a hard time sleeping, so he sat and watched her sleep for a tremendously long time. Their lovemaking was not easy. The entire time, he had to be soft and careful to avoid hurting the baby in her tummy. Hence, he was not fully satisfied. Chapter 2732. A nightmare. At least he got to spend the night with her, and for that he was happy. Apart from that, he was still a little puzzled. At some point during their sweet exchange, Gu Zijia's eyes flashed a tint of red light when she was at the climax of her sexual excitement. It was only for a second, so if Difui had not looked her in the eye at the moment it happened, he would not even have realized it. What puzzled him, even more, was the mysterious source of dark and evil aura that was hidden in the depths of her body. He could feel something while he was inside her body. At first he thought it was only a mistake, but the more he thought about it, the more he felt uneasy. He examined her body over and over, but nothing was found. He put his fingers down by her wrist to feel her pulse. Everything was perfectly normal. He could not help but think if he was oversensitive. Still worried, he waited until she was sleeping soundly before he used his spiritual power to trace every inch of her veins to make sure that she was fine. Gu Shijio woke up from a dreadful nightmare. She had been strolling through a blanket of dense pink mist. From a distance, a child could be heard crying. She followed the voice and found a baby girl in the corner. The baby was only a few months old, looking very sweet and adorable. Her chubby hands and chubby thighs curled up in rolls of fat. The girl was still crying, making Gu Zijia's heart sink. She could not resist the instinctive urge to hold the baby. Before she managed to touch her skin, she was surprised to find out that there was a trace of dark energy surrounding the baby girl's body. Shocked, she stopped to observe the strange encounter. The dark energy around her body strangled the baby, so it was difficult for her to breathe. The unexplained occurrence baffled her. She decided to perform a spell to dismiss the dark force and free the baby. But while she was waiting for the spell to activate, the dark source of energy suddenly came alive and turned into the form of a snake. Frighteningly quickly, the snake went into the baby's body and disappeared before her eyes. Gu Shijio did not see that coming. She scooped the baby up, so she could have a good look at her. Slowly, the baby opened her eyes and said something with difficulty. "Mother, help me." Certainly she was caught off guard. A bloodshot tint of red replaced her dark eyes. Even her lips turned entirely red too. "Hey, mother," she smilingly said, but in a very different tone from before. The baby's wicked smile terrified Gu Shijio. For a moment, she thought she was holding an evil being in her arms. Utterly shocked, she screamed out loud and abruptly woke up from the nightmare and realized that she was still in her bedroom with no sign of any baby girl. Her heart still thumped with fright, and her entire body was drenched in sweat. What is it? Did you have a nightmare? Difui gently rubbed her forehead. With a sigh, Gu Shizhou nodded. What was the dream about? Gu Shizhou paused for a second. In an instant, she had forgotten what the dream was all about. She could roughly recall seeing a beautiful child who referred to her as mother. There was only one child who would call her so. She immediately assumed the dream was about Hao. I think the dream was about Hao. What about him? I barely remember what happened. I only know it was a nightmare. She suddenly became nervous. By the way, we have not heard from him in a while. Has something bad happened to Hao? Chapter 2733. I am just a little bored. Quickly, Gu Shizhou retrieved her directed audio spell to get in touch with Di Hao. It did not take long before he picked up the call. Mother, are you missing me? Gu Shizhou was slightly relieved. The boy sounded lively, so he should be fine. However, the background noise from the other end of the call startled her. She could hear the sound of wind whistling and people fighting. There was even a long, doleful cry uttered by some animal. Di Hao was obviously in the middle of a fight. Had he been attacked? Where did Yanli go? Gu Shizhou had so many questions for Di Hao but was interrupted. Mother, are you doing fine? Where is father? If Di Hao had the time for much chit-chat, he must be doing fine. Moreover, Yanli was there with him. Yanli made a promise that he would keep the boy safe. No being in the Starry Crescent Land was strong enough to threaten Yanli. Therefore, under his care, Di Hao would not be at risk at all. Even if there was a danger, all Di Hao had to do was to stand and watch. Your father is here. Where are you? Who are you fighting with? There is nothing to worry about, Mother. I am just a little bored. Right now, I am messing around with a flood dragon. It was only a flood dragon. Yanli, and even Di Hao could easily defeat a flood dragon. No matter how powerful the dragon was, it was surely not enough to fight them. She enjoined her son to be obedient, and Di Hao acknowledged her concerns with a few chuckles. While they were still chatting, Yanli's abrupt voice could be heard screaming from behind. Di Hao, are you trying to kill yourself? Get down from it now. Yanli's instructions alarmed her. She could tell that he was raising his voice from at least 100 meters away from Di Hao. Mother, let's continue next time. There is no need for you to worry about me. I am doing just fine. Di Hao ended the call abruptly. That left Gu Shizhou baffled. Yanli was slightly depressed, but he rarely lost his composure. He was definitely a refined gentleman. Therefore, Di Hao must have done something terrible. Yanli was utterly annoyed. When Di Hao spoke to his mother, he was sitting on top of a snowy white flood dragon. He hung himself around its horns and was being flung around like a mini windmill. The flood dragon was no ordinary one. It was about to become a nightmare for them. Normally, a flood dragon's spiritual power would be around level 10, thus making its existence somewhat spectacular in the land of mortals. No one dared to approach them. However, Yanli could still easily defeat them all, even if 10 flood dragons chose to attack him at once. Hence, when Di Hao told Yanli to hunt down a flood dragon in exchange for his freedom, he did not hesitate to agree. Never had he expected that the flood dragon that Di Hao found was the king of the herd. Furthermore, it was about to reach its next stage of evolution into a real dragon. There were strict conditions to decide whether a flood dragon could be transformed into a real dragon. Sometimes, the probability was less than 1 in a million. However, if a flood dragon was able to meet all the conditions, it definitely had eminent qualities that were unparalleled with the rest of its kind. The snowy white flood dragon in front of them was the best of its kind. It had been cultivating for more than 10,000 years now, which made it more ancient than any of the other beings in the Starry Crescent Land. It barely showed itself in public and had been hiding and cultivating in isolation, near a mountain covered in snow. Its trails were so perfectly hidden that no one ever noticed its existence, not even Difui. Today was finally the day it could become a real dragon. It could achieve its lifelong dream. It was lying in a pool of clear water, while trying to absorb the essence of the moon, through a rift. Meanwhile, it had to spit out its internal pill so that dragon scales could slowly form around its body. The physical transformation was a difficult journey, but it was all worth it. When the final piece of its scale was transformed, it could finally become a mighty dragon. Unfortunately, 3 invaders interrupted it when it was 2/3 done. Not wanting to get distracted, it set off a tremendous pressure in the air in an attempt to sweep the 3 invaders away. To its surprise, only the lady was affected. Furthermore, the little boy took away the dragon pearl that was hanging loosely by its mouth. Chapter 2734. Half of its heart. A dragon's pearl was the ultimate source of life for any kind of dragon. Given that a little kid had stolen it, the great white dragon quickly got into a towering rage. In a fit of violent anger, it took off in an attempt to recapture its stolen treasure. Dihao started running once he stole the pearl. What surprised Yun Yanli was that the silly boy was actually running away from Yun Yanli instead of towards him for help. Fortunately, his short legs were no obstacle to him. He was running incredibly fast as though he had a pair of Hot Wheels on his feet. The great white dragon howled its displeasure while engaging Dihao in a close pursuit. In Yun Yanli's field of vision, the two were drifting farther and farther away. Yun Yanli had no words for the boy's mischief, but he decided to follow them. When he finally saw them again, the boy was hanging on the great white dragon's horns. The great white dragon stood high into the sky, about 100 meters tall. It was shaking its head as vigorously as it could, swinging Dihao's little body in the air like a flag. The boy and the dragon were in the middle of a massive fight, and there was a chance that Dihao might be swallowed alive by the great white dragon at any time. Yun Yanli began to get really worried about the naughty little boy. He called out to him before leaping into the air to get the boy down. He did not take long to reach the boy, but Dihao reacted quickly enough to kick his hand away from grabbing him. "I want to conquer it." Yun Yanli was at a loss for words. He could not believe what the boy just said. In order to conquer a creature, one must defeat it, and convince the creature to surrender wholeheartedly to the person whom it would now refer to as its master. Dragons were known to be proud of their impeccable pedigree. These creatures would not surrender easily. In fact, they would probably choose to accept death rather than submit. The flood dragon was almost evolving, so it must think very highly of itself. Moreover, its pearl was taken away at a crucial time, possibly rendering its previous efforts fruitless. Hence, the likely outcome of the fight was that Dihao could possibly be torn into shreds. So why would the flood dragon even surrender itself to the boy? It was highly unlikely. Under the current circumstances, Yun Yanli was convinced that none of them was able to leave this place alive. The flood dragon was, apparently, able to understand their conversations. It howled a loud cry of amusement. "I will never be conquered," it thought to itself. It would never allow its mighty self to be conquered by a despicable human that inconvenienced it. Then the flood dragon spiraled into the sky, gathering speed as though it was becoming a streak of lightning. It started summoning the winds and the rain. Droplets in the air slowly transformed into sharp weapons, which were all simultaneously aimed at little Dihao. Yun Yanli followed them and saw everything that was happening in the sky. He watched as the rain droplets turned into sharp crystals, billowing and snapping in the wind like a swirling vortex. It was an attack on a catastrophic scale where the crystals were coming straight at Dihao from every angle. Obviously, the flood dragon had just launched its deadliest move. Even Yun Yanli would struggle to defend himself from the sharp crystals. What more for Dihao was only a boy. On days involving long journeys, the boy would even request to be carried instead of walking on his own. He was so fragile that even stepping on a rock would bother him for the whole day. Once hit, the boy would end up becoming a hedgehog with sharp crystals. Without hesitation, Yun Yanli sent himself across the air and covered the boy with his body. At the same time, he also released a protective wizardry barrier to shield them away from the crystals. These crystals of tremendous force landed on his wizardry barrier like a storm, though most were bounced off. However, there were still many crystals in the sky. Chapter 2735. Half of its heart, too. Crystals were abundant in the sky, dropping toward them like a rainstorm of deadly needles. In just a few seconds, more and more needles started to get caught on the surface of the wizardry barrier, slowly causing the barrier to break. And in the end, some needles were able to penetrate through and cut right into Yun Yanli's flesh. Yun Yanli's body trembled slightly as he snorted in pain. Blood slowly traced down his back and dripped onto the dragon pearl in Dihao's hand. His blood then continued to stain the great white dragon's scales. The great white dragon was ready to swing them away from its head. However, the sudden smell of Yun Yanli's blood diverted its attention. Master. Ming Dai could be heard calling out loud to Yun Yanli from afar when she saw him bleeding. Desperately, she came straight to him. Roar! The great white dragon uttered another long howl before sweeping her away in a blinding flash of blue light, thus sending her across the air like a shooting star. Shocked, Yun Yanli wanted to leave and find her, but was stopped by Dihao. Don't go. Yun Yanli hesitated a little. While he still had a hard time deciding whether to stay or go, the dragon's long howl instantly distracted him. There were some pauses in between like it was trying to talk. Yun Yanli was never able to understand the language of the animals. But this time he could magically understand the flood dragon. What is your relationship with the Emperor Immortal, Yun Lang? He was my father, Yun Yanli honestly answered, though still dumbstruck. Yun Yanli's reply startled the great white dragon. After a pause, it took a turn in the air and headed to the ground. Come on down. I will fulfill a wish of yours. It stopped by the hill, where they could finally stand and talk. The sudden plot twist caught Yun Yanli in astonishment. On the contrary, Dihao was not quite as surprised. He tugged on Yun Yanli's sleeves and said, "Come on, let's get down from here." After a while, Yun Yanli found himself sitting by the rock, caught with a myriad of thoughts. His father had once saved the great white dragon's life. So, in order to repay its debt to the man, the great white dragon made a promise to Yun Lang that one day, it would grant a wish to him, or his children, and fulfill anything that was asked. The only way for the great white dragon to recognize him, or his children, was to stain the pearl with blood. However, as an emperor immortal, Yun Lang never truly cared about the promise of a flood dragon, so he never mentioned anything about the promise or the flood dragon to Yun Yanli. The flood dragon valued loyalty very much. It had not forgotten about the promise that it made almost thousands of years ago. Yun Yanli was so surprised that he could not speak. Ask for half of its heart. Quick, ask for half of its heart. Yun Yanli could not deal with the cruelty. Taking away half of the flood dragon's heart would kill it. Meanwhile, the flood dragon had obviously heard Dihao's request but said nothing. It was patiently waiting for an answer from Yun Yanli. Could you give me half of your heart? Yun Yanli awkwardly asked. Is this your only request? Yes, Yun Yanli firmly said. The great white dragon first looked at little Dihao in bafflement, and then to Yun Yanli. Ask the boy why he needs my heart. To save a life. Dihao answered before Yun Yanli even translated the flood dragon's message for him. He obviously understood the flood dragon too. Puzzled, the great white dragon asked, "It is nothing strange for this man, the son of my savior, to understand my language. His late father and I once made a blood agreement. When his blood is dripped on my pearl, we can communicate with one another. As for you, how did you manage to understand me?" "Because I am a genius," Dihao answered frankly. Chapter 2736. Half of its heart 3. The great white dragon was dumbstruck and decided not to linger on its earlier question. Whose life do you intend to save? The heavenly secret cannot be shared. Dihao refused to tell. Dihao gazed at the creature intently and reassured. You should know that the heart is very important to me and the world. I am sure that it will not be wasted. He continued to play around with the dragon pearl on his hand. You will not die even if half of your heart is taken. What you need is to use this pearl to recreate the other half slowly. In 10,000 years your heart will, once again, become a whole. The great white dragon looked at him in disbelief. I cannot believe that you are so well informed about these facts. Who are you exactly? Dihao. He answered delightfully. I have never heard of such a name. You have now. It is time for you to do what you have promised. Remember, I need the left half of your heart. The great white dragon hesitated a little. It was still unwilling to submit half of its heart so abruptly. It was finally the day that it could finally become a real dragon. Once its heart was taken, It would need at least another 10,000 years to reach the same milestone again. However, the promise must be honored. Even if it was unwilling to, it had no choice. The great white dragon still kept its promise, though it was not entirely ready. It had to endure the pain and slashed its chest open to take out its heart. With its sharp claw, it separated its heart chamber into 2 halves and submitted the left half to Di Hao. All of its scales were trembling due to the pain. Di Hao accepted the heart and at the same time, returned the pearl to the great white dragon. He also offered it a bottle of medicine. This medicine will help your heart to recover faster. In 5,000 years, your heart will become whole again. The great white dragon headed straight into the snowy mountains to meditate and rehabilitate. It was then that Yin Yanli saw how messy the whole place had turned out to be. He then looked at Di Hao with a sudden realization. I finally know why you insisted on following me around. Your company has not been entirely pleasant, but I know now that you are only doing this all because you really needed the other half of the flood dragon's heart. Yes, Di Hao answered him honestly. How did you know that the connection between the flood dragon and I? Di Hao looked away and softly said, the heavenly secret must not be told. Yin Yanli was not quite pleased. At first he did not want to agree to Di Hao's overbearing request. He never wanted the child to be around, but one directed audio changed his mind. The child promised to share more about Zhu Duqing to prepare Yin Yanli for his revenge. Without any forethought, Yin Yanli agreed. He thought that taking a child with him should not be much of a problem, even though he could tell that Gu Shizhou was not entirely at ease to see her child go. Acting on impulse, he made a promise to Gu Shizhou that he would protect Di Hao at all costs until the child was returned to her once more. Never had he imagined the kind of trouble he would have to go through. The child was too naughty. Many a time, Yin Yanli wanted to send the boy back to his mother. However, the boy would cry whenever Yin Yanli threatened to send him away. It was unusual to see a beautiful baby crying with great distress. Every passerby would automatically judge Yin Yanli. As for Mingdai, it looked as though she was the one instructing him to be cruel to his son from a different wife. It was a frustrating experience, to say the least. Mingdai was never fond of the little intruder who disrupted her personal time with Yin Yanli, so she was never friendly to Di Hao. The way she looked at him was even violent at times. However, she knew that she was not allowed to hurt Di Hao, or else Yin Yanli would be in great trouble. She had to suppress her urge to stab the boy in the back, even though she hated him to a great extent. Chapter 2737. Whose life are you trying to save? She did not utter a word to Di Hao for the entire time that they traveled together. The little one was acting weird as well. He only cared about Yin Yanli and never gave Mingdai any attention. When Yin Yanli had to be away for some errands, he would ask Mingdai to take care of Di Hao for a while, but Di Hao was never keen on it. The way he looked at Mingdai was always unfriendly, sometimes even with a feeling of revulsion. All in all, Di Hao and Mingdai were deemed to be incompatible in many ways. Yin Yanli was quite troubled by the tension, but he was at least happy to know that the boy relied on him. The little one is Zijia's child, so he thought it would be good if they could be close. In fact, he was glad to be needed and to have her child around. Little did he know that the child had a hidden agenda. Still puzzled, Yin Yanli looked at Di Hao sternly. Why did you have to make such a big plot involving me? If you really needed the other half of the flood dragon's heart, you could have brought your father here. He would have done the same thing with ease. Why did the boy insist on playing the fool and following Yin Yanli around? Di Hao explained. The flood dragon has been cultivating for more than 10,000 years and has never hurt a single soul. From the way it cultivates, it will one day become a celestial being. It has to submit its heart of its own free will. We are not supposed to kill it or threaten it, or else the heart will lose its effect. Yin Yanli was surprised. What do you need half of its heart for? Its heart can be used to purify even the darkest form of evil energy. You said that you needed it to save a life. Whose life are you trying to save? Di Hao took a deep breath before answering. A very close relative of mine. There was no reason to lie to Yin Yanli, for he had helped to retrieve the heart. A close relative? Who is it? Yin Yanli was baffled. Di Hao only smiled at him. It was yet another heavenly secret. With a sneer, Yin Yanli said nothing more, and was ready to leave. From the way Dihao fought with the flood dragon, the boy's kung fu was already so advanced that he would be just fine going on his own. Therefore, Yin Yanli found himself feeling a little foolish to think that the naughty boy actually needed his care and protection. Now that the boy already had what he wanted, Yin Yanli would not be of any good to him anymore. However, Dihao seemed to be still following him. Where are you going? Yin Yanli did not even turn around to answer him. With a sigh, Dihao knew how much he had offended Yin Yanli. He decided to tell Yin Yanli from far behind, "Stay away from Mingdai. She is not the one for you. You are going to endure plenty of suffering if you stick with her." With a hiss, he disdained the boy's warning, for he knew how incompatible they were. Mingdai was his most loyal companion with a heart of complete dedication. Now that she was swept far away by the flood dragon, he felt obliged to find her. Dihao watched as Yin Yanli disappeared from his sight. He shook his head in disapproval, for he realized how soft-hearted Yin Yanli was for the woman. He would never be able to kill her, even though she would eventually become the greatest obstacle in his life. Dihao started thinking if he should help Yin Yanli as a favor for what the man had done for him. He felt the need to kill the woman. When Dihao found Mingdai, she was unconscious. She had been sent flying through the air with such great force that she managed to bring down 2 trees with her before finally stopped at a big rock. Her celestial physique managed to keep her alive even though she was fatally injured. Her breathing was very weak, like a candle flickering in the wind. Dihao looked at her for a while. Slowly, he raised his hand that was already loaded with a 7-colored ray. He never liked killing a woman, especially one who was already fatally injured. It would hurt his dignity, but he needed to help Yin Yanli. Chapter 2738. I will heal your wound. The 7-colored ray transformed into its brightest form. Apparently, Dihao was ready to strike at any time. Mingdai, on the other hand, was already dying. Once hit by the ray, she would be immediately killed. Bang! A streak of lightning emerged abruptly and collided with the 7-colored ray in Dihao's hand. The violent bombardment of 2 immense powers managed to startle the entire area, sending tremors across the grounds as a result of the powerful collision. Mingdai rolled a few rounds on the ground as a result of the impact. She started bleeding from her nose and her mouth while her breathing became even more unstable. Understandably, Dihao was pushed away by the impact as well, and the blood in his body started boiling. He was a little pale and needed a moment to catch his breath. The force that stopped him was a celestial lightning bolt. In the sky, black clouds gathered overhead. It was an unmistakable ominous sign of more lightning to come. He knew that the first streak of lightning that hit him was only meant to caution him. If he insisted on killing the woman, he would be struck for real. Nevertheless, he refused to heed the warning and carried on with his mission to kill. Dihao, what are you trying to do? A voice could be heard calling out loud from afar. In an instant, Yin Yanli emerged from the sky and stood himself between them. Yin Yanli's predestined fate seemed like an inexorable doom to the man. Dihao finally gave in and changed his mind. He looked up and said in a discreet manner, Yin Yanli, Mingdai is never going to be the right one for you. You have to be careful around her. Do not let her become an obstacle in your life. Yin Yanli remained silent. Dihao certainly did not seem like an ordinary child. He talked like a divine being who was overlooking a mortal that was beneath him. The boy's serious expression certainly startled Yin Yanli a little. However, he did not know how to respond at the time. Swiftly, Dihao left them alone. Yin Yanli was still caught in bewilderment. The boy often caught him off guard with many unexplained occurrences. It was also pretty odd that Dihao was the first to locate Mingdai in this desolate corner. None of the things he said or did made any sense to Yin Yanli. Was he only saying all this because of his unpleasant encounters with Mingdai? Or had he foreseen something in the future? While Yin Yanli was all caught up in his thoughts, Mingdai finally recovered from her unconsciousness. Master, I am glad that you are safe. She became hopeful at the plain sight of Yin Yanli. Yin Yanli knew that Mingdai was the most loyal companion that he could ever have. She was also the only one who truly cared for him. Therefore, he could not let her die. He helped her up. Sit up. I will heal your wound. Ming Dai was so weak that she could not even sit up straight, but her eyes still shone with joy. She tried to steady herself to absorb the steady flow of energy from her back. Yun Yanli was transferring part of his spiritual power to revive her veins and vessels that were slowly dying away. Slowly but surely, signs of life returned to her ailing body. Yun Yanli had been quite distant to her for a while. They never really talked, as he seemed annoyed about the fact that she left the Shura world for him. Although Ming Dai felt despaired, she refused to surrender. The more he pushed her away, the more motivated she became. She disregarded all of Yun Yanli's disapprovals and stayed by his side insistently. She was loyal and faithful and ever present to serve all of his needs. He finally showed kindness to her, and even offered to drain his spiritual power to heal her wound. This could be a good start. Clearly, he was not entirely unmoved by her devotion. After an hour, the entire treatment was complete. Yun Yanli finally let go of his hands from her back. Without the support, Ming Dai's body started to sway, and suddenly, she spat out a mouthful of blood. She seemed to be falling back to the ground. Yun Yanli reached out for her and supported her with his arm. Still not feeling well? Meanwhile, she supported her head on his chest. Ming Dai's pale face clearly showed how uncomfortable she was. I feel terrible. Chapter 2739. Address me as your brother. Yun Yanli frowned, and checked her pulse once again. He realized that there was no improvement in her injury, and she was still unable to move around by herself. She struggled to get up. I can walk. She spat another mouthful of blood after struggling for a moment. Yun Yanli remained silent, but carried her in his arms. I'll get someone to check on you. He was not a medical expert, but common injuries were not something difficult for him. Nonetheless, he was helpless when it came to such severe injuries like hers. Ming Dai rested in his arms while he carried her. She could finally lean on him. She had been waiting for this moment for years. That embrace belonged to her. No one could take it away. She would kill anyone that came in her way right now. Suddenly, she seemed to recall something. Where is His Highness Dihao? She asked as she looked around. Did the dragon eat him? He left. Yun Yanli replied calmly. He did not want to talk about that kid right now. Ming Dai was delighted that the annoying kid had gone. She could finally have some alone time with her master. That kid is too, she was going to say annoying, but she quickly changed her mind. Too mischievous. His parents did not even bother to educate him. Yun Yanli's gaze darkened. Ming Dai, stop judging. He is just a kid. As usual, Ming Dai did not argue with Yun Yanli. Noted. I just feel that he does not look like a kid. What's worse is that he has been getting you into trouble. I'm mad that he made a mess. I'm sorry. I'll stop talking. Anyway, she was pleased that he had left. She knew that Yun Yanli did not love her, but that did not matter. She loved him, and she believed that love takes time to grow. Therefore, she was confident that Yun Yanli would fall in love with her one day. Yun Yanli silently leaped into the air with her in his arms. However, they almost crashed into someone on the way up. Xueyi. Xueyi was wearing a green robe, which made him look like a hermit. Similarly, he frowned in surprise as he saw Yun Yanli. He replied with a charming smile. Your Highness Yun, how are you doing lately? It's good to see you again. Oh dear, what happened to your subordinate? Did she get struck by a lightning bolt? Yun Yanli automatically had a bad headache when he saw him. He took a step back and replied, This has nothing to do with you. He then turned around and was ready to leave. Nonetheless, Xueyi stopped him with his flute. She looks terrible. Are you sure that you can treat her injuries? Yun Yanli got his message and quickly asked, Do you know how to heal her? Xueyi chuckled. I'm an expert in this field. Yun Yanli heaved a sigh of relief when he heard Xueyi's reply. Great, can you treat her injuries? Xueyi was dissatisfied with his question. Is this how you beg for help? Yun Yanli tried to endure his wickedness despite the misery he was already facing. Could you please, insincere? Yun Yanli clenched his fists secretly and added. What is considered sincere? What do you want? Yun Yanli knew that Xueyi would not be easy with him, and he had to go through a series of tortures if he needed his help. Xueyi pondered as he played with the flute in his hand. "Address me as your brother." Yun Yanli immediately shouted, "Are you sick?" He knew that Xueyi was fooling him. Yun Yanli walked away without entertaining the request. Xueyi immediately added, "Her blood vessels and nerves are severely injured. She will be dead in 3 months if she is not treated." Chapter 2740. Thinking about a wedding ceremony, Yun Yanli was still angry. However, he slowly turned around and asked, "Are you sure you can treat her injuries?" "Of course." A hint of sarcasm still occupied Xueyi's eyes as he added, "That's why you have nothing to lose by addressing me as your brother." "Master, I don't want him to treat my injuries." Mingdai spoke with a weak tone as she pulled on Yun Yanli's sleeves. She tried so hard to get away from an annoying child, but had to encounter another annoying person just shortly after. Yun Yanli looked at her for a moment before his gaze returned to Xueyi. Xueyi was staring at him with a smile on his face, as if waiting to say something mean. "I'm an impatient man." Before he said something worse than that, Yun Yanli interrupted him. "Brother." Xueyi was speechless. In fact, he was just joking with Yun Yanli. To his surprise, the man actually complied. He glanced at Mingdai and knew that Yun Yanli truly cared for his subordinate. Jokingly, he added as he looked at Yun Yanli, "I finally know how much you care about her. It is to the extent that you can put your principles aside for a subordinate." Yun Yanli frowned. "Stop the crap. Save her as you promised." Xueyi went to her and requested, "Call me your husband." Yun Yanli's face went pale. "Xueyi, are you a man? Breaking promises is not something a real man would do." Coldly, Xueyi laughed. "I've never thought so highly of myself. In fact, breaking promises is very common among devils. Have you forgotten this?" Yun Yanli's face turned dark as he turned away with Mingdai in his arm. He must have been insane to listen to Xueyi in the first place. He was not a trustworthy person. In fact, he might not even be capable enough to heal Mingdai. Perhaps he was just making fun of him. Only Difui could tame a man like him. Within seconds, Yun Yanli disappeared along with Mingdai. It wasn't easy for him to take her away so quickly since he only had one arm left. After watching him disappear, Xueyi shifted his gaze to the lotus root on his palm that was made of white jade. That was the she jade, a well-known herb that can heal and rejuvenate. Most importantly, it could help to fix broken limbs and make them grow again. Frankly, Xueyi was annoyed by the fact that Yun Yanli had lost an arm. He had been thinking about the jade ever since he heard about it from Difui. Finally, he was able to obtain one. Read the next chapter on our VIP novel. Nonetheless, his efforts seemed to be fruitless after all. He sighed as his fingers rubbed against the jade. It seemed that Yun Yanli did not appreciate the effort that he had made. "I'm sorry, young man. I can't treat this type of injury." "Young man, this lattice blood vessels and nerves are badly injured. Please look for other physicians." "I can't help." "I'm really sorry. I can't help. I don't think she will live for more than 4 hours." "Young man, you should prepare for her funeral." Yun Yanli had visited a few medical stores with Mingdai. Unfortunately, none of the physicians could help. In the end, Yun Yanli decided to take a break. He was idling as he glimpsed at Mingdai, who was lying in his arm. This lady was the only one who cared about him. Did God really need to take her away from him? Mingdai was getting weaker, so she placed her hand on Yun Yanli's arm and tried her best to open her eyes. "Master, am I going to die?" Yun Yanli took a deep breath before replying. "Perhaps, I have another solution. I will bring you to see Shijio. She can help." Mingdai frowned and shook her head at his remark. "It's too late." She struggled to breathe before continuing her next sentence. "I don't want you to beg her. She looked down on you." Chapter 2741. The obstruction at the wedding ceremony. The phrase struck Yun Yanli's face like a cane. "Do you want to die?" Mingdai closed her eyes slightly as she heard that familiar threat. "My apologies, master." Yun Yanli was anxious and frustrated at the same time. He remained quiet as he strode forward without a direction. He pursed his lips as he was worried that Mingdai might just die silently as he continued walking. Master, you've promised to marry me, Mingdai whispered. I can marry you. Yun Yanli finally spoke after a long silence. Mingdai has done so much for him, so the least that he could do now was to fulfill her last little wish. Mingdai's eyes were opened widely. She had been dreaming this for a long time now, and it was finally coming true. Trembling, she tried to reach Yun Yanli's collar and grabbed it. Could you please give me a wedding ceremony? Just a small one will do. It was challenging to organize a wedding ceremony within 4 hours. However, Yun Yanli would figure it out. Money could solve many problems. In addition, he was also good at threatening people. 3 hours later, the drummer, the red sedan, and a wedding officiant were prepared. Mingdai finally embarked on the red sedan. However, she was lying down as she could not even remain seated. A moment later, she was sent into a mansion. The mansion belonged to a rich man in the town. Coincidentally, the owner had the same surname, Yun. Yun Yanli saw a sign at the mansion with his surname carved on it. An hour ago, he threatened the owner of this family to lend him his mansion. Although he had given the man a good offer, he did not hesitate to threaten him as well. The owner of the mansion came from an ordinary family. How could he even say no to Yun Yanli? In the end, they agreed to lend the mansion to him, and even helped him to put up the decorations. As everything was put together in such an ad hoc fashion, none of them had time to invite their friends or loved ones. Yun Yanli was slightly depressed as he carried Mingdai down from the sedan and walked into the wedding hall, while the drummer was playing music in the background. Although Mingdai was extremely weak, she still tried her best to stay awake and looked at him as much as possible. Yun Yanli closed his eyes to hide his emotions as he noticed her face getting paler and paler. What if he proposed to marry his beloved when he was dying? Would his beloved try to fulfill his wish? It was unlikely. He was nothing in her eyes. She would not even frown even if he died in front of her. He smiled with grief and tried to stop thinking about all this nonsense now. However, before he stepped into the wedding hall with Mingdai in his arm, a man was floating around in the wedding hall. He was wearing a glamorous robe with light embroidery, and carried a green flute in his hand while his arms were crossed in front of his chest. Yun Yanli, you are fast. I can't believe that you're getting married again. Marrying someone is just like having a meal, I guess. Yun Yanli had a headache just seeing the man. Xueyi, why are you here? He asked in an icy tone. Xueyi smiled and added, I'm a straightforward person. I'm not going to beat around the bush this time. You have 2 options now. You can continue marrying this little butterfly, and then we watch her die together. Or, you cancel the wedding ceremony now, and I'll save her life. However, you need to promise me that you will have a clean cut with her after I save her life. Your call. Chapter 2742. Xueyi's demand. Before Yun Yanli said anything, Mingdai interrupted him. Master, I refuse to get any help from him. I would rather die. All I have ever wanted is the wedding. She would rather die in Yun Yanli's arms than to be removed entirely from his life. The separation was even more painful than death itself. Xueyi ignored her. His eyes were only locked on Yun Yanli. Yun Yanli gazed at him in return. What do you want? Why must you stand between us? Xueyi gave him a smile of mischief. Yun Yanli, let me remind you that you and I are married by the grace of God. I must stop you before you cheat on me. Xueyi, you are a man. Why are you messing around? I have no time for your silly jokes. Yun Yanli looked very annoyed. I know very well that I am a man. Xueyi kept his composure and calmly replied. However, who said that 2 men cannot get married? The last remark angered Yun Yanli. I am not gay. Xueyi rubbed his palms in delight. Oh, but I am. Xueyi's tone irritated Yun Yanli. It was evident that he was furious now. Perhaps, he would even unleash hell on Xueyi. Choosing not to piss the man off even further, Xueyi changed his attention to Mingdai, who was still lying helplessly in Yun Yanli's arms. You can take your time to think about it. Very soon, perhaps the problem will be solved, and you will not even need to think about it anymore. With his teeth gritted tightly, Yin Yanli answered without any delay, I am going for the second option. Now save her life. You are taking advantage of my misfortune, Ming Dai complained in a trembling voice. With his eyes squinted in delight, Kuan Xueyi answered scornfully, Little Ming Dai, you are right. Taking advantage of situations is one of my favorite things to do. Ming Dai answered furiously, You are shameless. Even if you can break us apart, my master will never marry you for real. Who says that he is going to marry me? I am going to marry him. Kuan Xueyi shook his finger at her while correcting her. Ming Dai was dumbstruck that she could only utter a word. You. Out of anger, she finally conveyed what she had always wanted to say. You are only doing this for the sake of Gu Shijiao, aren't you? She has already found the one that she loves, and yet she is still reluctant to let other men go. She had to send her son to disrupt us. Now it is your turn. Ming Dai stopped speaking. Yin Yanli was not pleased by her statement. At first, it was easy for Kuan Xueyi to sympathize with her ailing condition. However, her words completely changed his mind about saving her life. For what you have said, I should not even bother saving you life at all. What a mean assumption. I do not want to be saved by you. Ming Dai was indeed stubborn. Kuan Xueyi gazed at her for a while before laughing sarcastically. Knowing me, I always like to do the complete opposite of one's will. The more you refuse it, the more I intend to see it happen. He waved his hand and launched a streak of light at her, and she passed out after spitting out another mouthful of blood. Yin Yanli was triggered by the sudden strike. How could you? Swiftly, Kuan Xueyi placed his finger on his lips to signal him to remain silent. Hush. There is no making without breaking. I cannot help her if she stays awake. Quietly, Yin Yanli observed the whole treatment from aside, as he was worried that Kuan Xueyi might play tricks on him. The Kuan was too tricky. He did not mean most of the things he said. Even the name that he first used to introduce himself to Yin Yanli was not his real name. It was only much later that Yin Yanli finally knew that his name was not Kuan Yunjan. He would not believe it if he did not hear his friends calling him by his real name. Nevertheless, this time, Kuan Xueyi did fool around. He was committed to delivering what he promised. Yin Yanli watched everything from the side. He noticed that Kuan Zui's complexion changed to become quite pale and tired. It looked as if he was the one with the injury. When Kuan Zui's sleeve slipped off, his bare arm also caught Yin Yanli's attention. Part of his skin seemed burnt with apparent wrinkles. Chapter 2743. Things that should have happened surprised. Yin Yanli took a step forward to take a better look, but just as he advanced, his burn had been covered by a piece of his clothes. Baffled, Yin Yanli continued to watch Kuan Xueyi perform the operation quietly. He decided to force himself to believe that the Kun's nasty injury had nothing to do with him. The only thing he should care about now was Kuan Zui's ability to restore Ming Dai's health. In another city, Dihao was taking a break from his long journey. His exhaustion had prevented him from venturing any further. At first, the owner of the hostel was reluctant to accept the adorable child as a guest in his accommodation. Luckily, the little boy did not let his size limit him. He had certainly brought enough money with him. An ingot of shiny silver managed to draw the owner's attention away from questioning Dihao's origin and family background. He was then assigned to the best guest room. Dihao had an obsession with cleanliness, but this time around he was too tired to care. He took a quick shower and climbed onto the bed and lay comfortably on the sheets. The shower must have gotten him a little refreshed as he did not fall asleep immediately. Intently, he observed his hand, like there was something precious on his palm. After a moment, he heaved a sigh of relief. It appeared that the future had been changed a little. However, he was suddenly overwhelmed by a sense of helplessness, worried that his body might disappear any time now. Perhaps when the entire course of fate was changed, he would become non-existent and go back to where he truly belonged. He tried to recall his childhood again, but there was nothing else that he significantly remembered. At this point, there was only one possibility. His parents' destiny might have been changed, but there was no way he could tell if it was a good or bad change. Even though he came from the future, he had no way to predict what was going to happen. From what he could recall, he was already an orphan right after he was born. He had never met his parents and had merely stumbled through his childhood. When his spiritual power was high enough, he taught himself everything and could create magic from thin air. The boy managed to create a mirror that had the ability to allow one to look into their past, allowing him to look back upon the years when his parents were still alive. He dug into the past and found out everything that happened to his parents. From his vision, his mother and father never mended their fences in the Shura world, as Yun Qinglua was there to put every obstacle in their way. Their misunderstanding snowballed. Although both of them managed to disarm the array formation that affected the entire Shura world, they never managed to make peace with one another. Gu Shijio eventually left the Shura world with grievance and returned to the Starry Crescent land. By that time, Lan Weihu completely fell into Fan Qianqi's plot. The primary and secondary venom finally took their forms. Lan Weihu died in agony while Yanchen took his own life in the name of love. Obviously, Gu Shijio took a really bad knock when some of her closest friends died. Grief and resentment started to consume her, which led the primary and secondary venom to get attached to her body. She managed to use her power as a great deity to purify the venom, but not without difficulty. However, the evil aura that the venom left behind was already disrupting her pregnancy. Eventually, the baby in her womb was turned into an evil being. The primary and secondary venom was the most profound form of a devil, and its venom had affected Gu Shijio. She became a person of unpredictable moods with no self-control whatsoever. Day by day, the devil took over her from within. When Difui returned to the Starry Crescent land, the venom had already controlled Gu Shijio to an unreversible extent. Many innocent lives were lost due to her violence. The Starry Crescent land had fallen into an abyss of miseries. Difui noticed her problem instantly, and after a series of violent battles, Difui finally defeated Gu Shijio. He wanted to purify the evil aura that had taken control over her, only to realize that the source of all evil was actually coming from the baby in her womb. Chapter 2744. The Master of the Heavenly Law Difui tried many ways to help her, but none could completely purify the devil from within. To his dismay, the evil spirit became agitated by his actions and drove Gu Shijio even further into darkness. She was prone to anger and would kill anyone ruthlessly. Unfortunately, her cruelty had completely clouded her sense of judgment. In fact, the only thing she cared about was the child in her belly. Slowly, she started experiencing hallucinations and felt as though the entire world was going against her. Everyone was an enemy. One fine day, she even killed Gu Camo by accident. The severity of the problem had prompted Difui to talk to her about abortion. He told her to give up on the baby as they could always have more babies in the future. If she insisted on keeping the evil creature, the world would be doomed by a great calamity. Difui thought that removing the evil creature would set Gu Shijio back to her normal self. Never had he thought that the evil spirit was already deeply rooted in her soul. At that point, there was no way that he could set her free from the evil attachment. Helplessly, he watched as she turned more and more evil every day. Her evil self was completely illogical and unpredictable. She killed for fun and wreaked havoc at every chance, causing the people of the Starry Crescent land to live in fear. The worst thing was that the evil spirit was contagious. Once Gu Shijio injured her victim, he or she would be driven by the same devil to become a ruthless killing machine. It was at this point that Difui finally recovered his power and memory as the master of the heavenly law. With this responsibility, he had to fulfill his duty without fear or favor. There were only two options for him. He could choose to kill Gu Shijio to completely destroy the devil and purify the world with good energy, or he could step down as the master of heavenly law, which would lead to his death as punishment by the heavenly law. In the latter scenario, Gu Shijio would still plague the world until the next master of heavenly law emerged and served her justice. Knowing Difui, he created a third option. He mastered the highest form of a forbidden spell, one that could remove the evil spirit that was firmly established in Gu Zijia's soul. All of Gu Zijia's power would be removed in the process, thus reverting her to her normal self. When Difui finally caught Gushijio, he had no choice but to severely injure her, so that he could use the forbidden spell to get rid of the evil spirit in her body. The forbidden spell was a great torment as the entire process was carried out in burning flames, which was unbearable even for someone as tough as Gushijio. She screamed in agony for 3 days and 3 nights straight, until the whole rehabilitation was complete. Every trace of the evil spirit was finally removed. She turned out to be only an ordinary celestial being, which granted her immortality. On the negative side, she would not be able to practice or carry out any spell ever again. That was truly heart-wrenching for her to accept. In order to make up for her loss, Difui arranged a great banquet to celebrate their marriage. It appeared that the forbidden spell that Difui had created was an effective method to purify her, but it was associated with a high level of self-harm. In addition to his violation of the heavenly law, his power became greatly affected. The relative movement of the celestial bodies was greatly tied to the spiritual power of the master of heavenly law. Once his power was weakened, all the stars fell into a chaotic mess, thus messing the order of all 6 worlds. Things became worse when he became infected by the evil spirit from Guzijia's body. Part of the evil spirit remained in his body, but fortunately, it did not affect his behavior, only his recovery. To restore his spiritual power, he would take 100 years, instead of 10. Chapter 2745. The Master of the Heavenly Law, too. In the end, he had no choice but to resort to isolation. He sealed himself off in a bleak and lifeless land to focus solely on his cultivation. At that point, his relationship with Gushijio was already at its worst. Gushijio would not talk to him about anything at all. When he told her that he was about to isolate himself, she remained nonchalant. "What does it have to do with me?" she icily asked. Her reply had completely thrown Difui off guard. He said nothing more, and went straight into isolation. What he did not know was that Gushijio was already pregnant with their second baby, little Dihao. Despite her hatred for Difui, she cherished the baby very much. She could always feel at ease whenever she thought of the baby. However, her days in the residence of the Master of the Heavenly Law were not without difficulties. She was solely responsible for the Master of the Heavenly Law's punishment, for she had changed him from an emotionless man into a man in love. In addition to her violent past, and the fact that Difui was injured because of her meant that none of the servants in her new residence treated her with respect. They would not even talk to her at all. As for the celestial beings from the 6 worlds, they all looked down on her, but never really mistreated her. At least, they had to show some respect to the Master of the Heavenly Law. Most of the time, they would stay away to avoid seeing her in person. Without any kung fu, her spiritual power was even worse than a young servant in the 9th heaven. Anyone could simply hold her down with a single strike. She was as good as a decorative container that was only for display purposes. Many people talked behind her back, saying that her incompetence made her no longer a match for the Master of the Heavenly Law. She knew about the nasty things that people said about her. However, she was not bothered. The only thing that truly hurt her was the loss of her power. Being remarkably persevering, she tried many ways to practice her kung fu, but her attempts were all defeated by the internal injuries of her nervous system. Every time she tried to practice, every inch of her veins ached with wrenching pain. In the end, she chose to give up all for the sake of her baby. Dihao was a celestial baby, which made him unique. He had been in her womb for 3 years. She was almost convinced that the baby that she was carrying was highly abnormal, and could even turn out to be a beast. Fortunately, some fetal movement in her belly reminded her that the baby was well and alive. For the past 3 years, Difui had never shown up at all. Hence, Gushijio felt forgotten. Although she never complained about it, deep down, she still cared. Apparently, Dihao chose to come into the world at a bad time. Since Gushijio was alone most of the time, she often got bored. Hence, she would go out and travel every once in a while. When the contractions happened, she was caught in the wilderness. Extremely strong waves of pain immediately consumed her. She was all alone, and the pain she was experiencing made it impossible for her to get home. Therefore, she found a quiet place and thought about delivering the baby herself. Dihao's strength as a celestial baby was not to be underestimated. It certainly made it very difficult for Gu Shijie. The entire labor lasted for 10 days, in a place that was cold and miserably isolated. Even when she was struggling with her labor, Difui never showed up at all. When she could no longer handle the pain alone, she finally cried his name out loud, hoping that Difui would hear her calling. Difui once told her that if she called his name out loud while wearing the love bracelet, he would be able to hear it. No matter where he was, he would surely make his way to her in not more than 2 hours. It had been more than 12 hours since her desperate call, but Difui was still nowhere to be seen. Understandably, she became unconscious the moment the baby was delivered. When she regained consciousness, she was still in the forest. Strong winds raved through the trees and numbed her body because of the intense cold. Understandably, Dihao's birth was not properly handled, so the naked baby had been exposed to the cold for the past few hours. His signs of life were like a candle in the wind. Chapter 2746. The Master of the Heavenly Law, 3. Gu Shijie struggled to carry the baby in her arms and was alarmed by his lack of vitals. Frantically, she tried to save the baby's life, but there was nothing that she could use to restore the health of an infant. She tried many ways, but the baby was still unresponsive. He was not even breathing at the time. She watched helplessly as the baby died in her arms. Alone, she sat in the snow with the dead baby in her arms for hours. The snow had covered her entire body in white by then. Soon, she passed out in the snow again due to the intense cold. When she woke up, Fan Qianshi was the first person she saw. In the predestined fate, Fan Qianshi's identity remained concealed. He was never exposed from the beginning. He stayed anonymous, even when the invasion of Blue Fox Planet happened in the Starry Crescent Land. There was no conflict between him and Difui, nor had they ever met. No one knew he was actually the man who plotted it all. Not even Difui or Gu Shijie was aware of him. Gu Shijie was distraught with anxiety the moment she woke up and could not find the baby. Fan Qianshi told her that the baby was already dead and cremated. The news had brought her nothing but misery. She became hollow from within, and soon, she became very ill. There was no reason for her to live on anymore, so she began to be suicidal. Nonetheless, Fan Qianshi refused to let her die. He was, without a doubt, capable of stopping her from taking her own life. As a start, she was placed under intensive surveillance 24 hours a day. "You cannot stop me. You may be able to stop me now, but you cannot stop me forever," she firmly argued with the man. As long as she was determined to kill herself, she would eventually do it. After a long pause, Fan Qianshi told her that death should not be the only thing that she sought for. Without the baby, she still had her husband. As expected, Gu Shijie sneered at him. After all these years of disappointment, she had lost all hope in Difui, the almighty master of the heavenly law. "If I could restore all of your kung fu and power, would you stop trying to kill yourself?" Fan Qianshi offered. After putting in much thought into the offer, the idea finally quenched her suicidal thoughts. Hope returned to her. Fan Qianshi treated her very well. He managed to cure her wounds by using a set of secret techniques, and restored all of her power like before. He even taught her new kung fu moves, so that she could become even more powerful than before. They were together every day and night. So Fan Qianshi eventually fell for Gu Shijie, but the feelings were not mutual. One day, Gu Shijie found a magic mirror in Fan Qianshi's residence that would reflect the whereabouts of the viewer's loved one. Apparently, her hatred had not clouded her love for Difui. She still cared for him. Their loss of touch somehow worried her. Although the master of the heavenly law would not be easily harmed, she was still worried that something bad might have happened to him. Determined, she turned the mirror on and saw Difui on the screen. Difui was not in any danger, nor was he in isolation. He had yet to return to his residence. Instead, he was touring the celestial kingdom to make a comprehensive survey about the people's lives in each area. However, he was not alone. His companion was the goddess of war from the celestial kingdom. The way she looked at Difui was obviously full of respect, and the admiration was mutual. They looked like a happy couple as they walked through the splendor of the mountain scenery. It would seem that Difui was not interested in visiting his wife once he was done restoring his spiritual power. Instead, he chose to travel somewhere else. Chapter 2747. The Master of the Heavenly Law 4. Difui had not contacted anyone from the Starry Crescent land to inform them about his plans. It would appear that he could really go on living as though she never existed. The goddess of war started a conversation with him, involving details about his wife. However, Difui did not seem to care. He shook his head and answered with a smile. There is nothing special about her. I have lived for millions of years. Love affairs mean almost nothing to me. She was only a woman I met when I was undergoing a catastrophe in the lower bound. We were madly in love back then. But now that I have returned to the course of the heavenly law, nothing about us matters anymore. She once carried our child, but the child turned evil in the end, so I had to destroy it. She was injured in the process, so I decided to take her back and give her a place to stay. My residence had space for her, after all. Aren't you going to visit her? There is no point. My place is certain to remain safe and unthreatened. Without any kung fu, she will not be going anywhere. As long as she stays in my residence, she will be safe. I am reluctant to see her now. She is nothing but a decoration. Gu Shijiu spat a mouthful of blood onto the mirror and shut it down. Even though she could no longer see Difui, she stood gazing at the magic mirror for a very long while. She could not stop thinking about how much of a joke she was to him. After all these years of perseverance, she became nothing but a piece of decoration to the man she loved. Finally, Gu Shijiu agreed to marry Fan Qianshi. But in return he must teach her the best kind of kung fu that he knew. She fully intended to become stronger than ever. Fan Qianshi swiftly agreed. He did not only teach her kung fu, but he had also even transferred some of his spiritual power to her, so that she could experience a huge improvement in a short time. In order for Gu Shijiu to remarry, she had to break the love bracelet that connected her with Difui. Shattering the bracelet would also mean that their future together would come to an end. Before, she had no strength to shatter the bracelet into pieces. Nonetheless, as long as she kept on practicing, she would be able to break the bracelet someday. When she finally did it, the evanescent love bracelet shone a few bright streaks of seven-colored light before disappearing entirely. Subsequently, she was no longer Difui's wife. Fan Qianshi started preparing for his wedding ceremony. It was certainly going to be a grand banquet, so the news spread throughout the world. Many of his friends and acquaintances attended the wedding, including Difui, the man who had not shown up in a long while. As soon as he arrived, he became so angry that he destroyed the entire ceremony. Even Fan Qianshi's residence collapsed into ruins. The first heaven almost fell apart on that day. Difui was so powerful that he managed to create an earthquake that shattered the entire building. Obviously, Fan Qianshi became furious at what Difui had done. After an exchange of words, the two celestial beings decided to settle things then and there. The fight was absolutely world-shaking, destroying many things. In the very end, Fan Qianshi was defeated, and Difui burned him to death by using the fire of Red Lotus. As for Difui, he was severely injured too. Gu Shijiu was a spectator during the fight, and watched as Fan Qianshi died before her eyes. She was definitely enraged and became overwhelmed with resentment and hatred. Without much thought, she started attacking Difui. She summoned a sword and charged it with all of her power. It was the deadliest strike that she could launch at Difui. All this was to seek revenge for Fan Qianshi and herself. However, she had never really thought that the sword would really hit Difui. When she rushed aggressively towards him in the attack, he saw her coming, but never defended himself at all. The sword cut through his heart and nailed him to a wall. Naturally, no amount of weapons was able to hurt the master of the heavenly law. However, what Gu Shijiu used was a special technique that she had learned from Fan Qianshi, which was specifically tailored to killing the master of the heavenly law. As punishment for Difui's violation of the heavenly law, he was no longer clothed in an armor of proof. Gu Shijiu was his weakness, and also the only person who could ever truly kill him. Therefore, Gu Shijie watched as Difui became immortalized under her sword, and turned into faint streaks of light that wandered away. He wanted to explain himself, but never had the chance. Chapter 2748. The Master of the Heavenly Law 5. Before he disappeared completely, he managed to utter two last words, "Our child." Gu Shijie became dumbstruck in the aftermath of his death. She slowly sank to the ground, trying to absorb and accept what had happened. Fan Qianshi and Difui both had many friends. Both parties found it unacceptable that the same woman had caused the death of two mighty beings, especially since no one knew the truth behind the feud. They only believed what they saw. The two powerful men were dead, all because of the same woman. They gathered around her and started judging her like an evil enchantress who would only bring death to whoever she came into contact with. Words of abuse and contempt filled the air. Some were cursing at her. Others were crying at the loss of the men that they worshipped. Despite their harsh words, she remained unresponsive the entire time. In actuality, she could not even hear a word they said. Still trembling, she looked at her hands in remorse and started murmuring, as if talking to herself. Why didn't you fight back? She kept repeating her hoarse whisper. Every word was filled with deep regret and guilt. Her hands were still stained with Difui's blood. The strange thing was that instead of dripping away, his blood began to seep through her skin. All of a sudden, Gu Shijie seemed to have emerged from her preoccupation. Her body started trembling violently. She took the sword in her hand and stood up abruptly as her power was so strong that her aura became instantly intimidating, pushing everyone away from her. Finally, they realized that the woman who they once thought was useless had become so powerful in an instant. She retained an unpleasantly overbearing aura that would make the people around her fall to their knees and surrender themselves to her. Panicked, they wanted to run, but their feet were too weak to move. Everyone in the crowd thought that it was the end. The woman would surely make them suffer. However, to their utter surprise, Gu Shijie did not even bother to look at them. Looking pale and drawn, she stood in solitude and started performing a series of spells. Some informed ones could tell that she was performing a type of soul-calling spell, one that could summon dispersed souls, no matter how fragmented the deceased might be. After a long attempt, not even a fragment of the person's soul, who she was trying to rescue, was collected. In despair, she finally stopped trying. She suddenly threw back her head and laughed out loud hysterically. To everyone's surprise, she used the same sword and pushed the sharp edge right across her own body. The gaping wound gushed out a crimson flood. Difui, I am the one who killed you. Now I shall avenge you. It was her last message. Next, she used a spell that caused her body to explode into bits. That was the last image that Dihao saw from the magic mirror. A mist of blood floating through the air. Aside from Gu Zijie's perspective, Dihao was also able to see Difui's side of the story. From the screen, Dihao could see that Difui had indeed gone into isolation, and the fact that he was in love greatly obstructed his recovery. He could not stop worrying about his wife, who was all alone. His lack of concentration had almost cost him his life. The time when Gu Shijie was struggling in labor was also the time when Difui was struggling in his practice. As a result of his erratic practice, he turned into a jade statue without any sign of life. All 5 senses of his were lost, so he never heard any of Gu Zijie's calls. However, the lifeless transformation was actually a blessing in disguise for the man. When he finally regained his consciousness, half of his spiritual power was already recovered. Relieved, he planned to rest up for a bit before leaving the place, but all of a sudden, the love bracelet on his wrist had shattered. Chapter 2749. The Master of the Heavenly Law 6. Panicked, he could no longer stay still. He tried to see what happened, but his lack of focus had messed up his calculations. So he left the place and returned to his residence immediately. From the servants, he found out that Gu Shijie was pregnant. He also learned that she had been missing for many days. They were still trying to locate her. He felt as if a thunderclap had gone off just above his head. Anxiously, he started making calculations about Gu Zijie's whereabouts. The more he analyzed, the paler his face became. Finally, he was able to track the exact place where Gushijio delivered the baby. In order to find out the baby's location, he began to perform a series of secret tracking spells. The baby was finally uncovered in a forbidden land that was very much out of sight. He made his way through the forbidden land and found Di Hao, who was placed in an ice coffin. Di Hao's tiny body was frozen into a little ice ball. He was not breathing and did not show any sign of life, but Di Fui noticed that the boy's soul had never truly left his body. Technically speaking, the boy was still alive. Apparently, he had inherited some of Di Fui's unique characteristics. In order to survive in times of great danger, Di Fui would turn into a jade statue. As for the boy, he would play dead and appear as a corpse. Upon examining the ice coffin more closely, Di Fui realized that there were traces of Fan Qianshi all over the place. Hence, Di Fui immediately knew that it was Fan Qianshi who froze his child in ice. Surprised, Di Fui used his power to melt away the ice, so that he could transfer some of his spiritual power to the boy and revive him. The boy's exposure to the cold had significantly weakened his health. He could not even keep his eyes open. Without Di Fui's help, the boy would certainly never be able to wake up. While Di Fui was trying to save Di Hao, he also took the time to collect any clues around the ice coffin to understand the scenario better. He tried to picture the entire scene and imagine Fan Qianshi taking the baby in and sealing him away in the ice coffin. Before Fan Qianshi left, he had placed his hand on the coffin and said, "You have already obtained the rarest kind of celestial body even at such a tender age. What a miracle! I will freeze your body here for a while. Your blood and flesh can be of good use to me in alchemy. I can make a special pill out of your flesh, one that can make your mother fall irrevocably in love with me." Having retrieved Di Hao from the ice coffin, Di Fui then carried the baby away from the forbidden land. As soon as he escaped, the news about Fan Qianshi and Gu Zijia's wedding was already publicly announced. Nonetheless, he would not allow the wedding to happen, even if it meant spelling his death. However, the baby was too weak to be involved in the fight, so Di Fui set up a wizardry barrier around him before putting him in a cave. The cave was very well hidden, so there were hardly any signs of human activity around. In addition, there was a source of spiritual power in the cave, so the baby could absorb the very essence of heaven and earth to nurture his spiritual body. Before he left, he sealed off the cave with another wizardry barrier, so that no outsiders could enter and disrupt the baby. When everything was secure and done, he headed straight to Fan Qianshi's residence. At this point, Di Hao had already seen everything that he needed to know. He knew how his parents would eventually die. Every image was vividly played. Every conversation was clearly heard. However, he could not figure out what they were all thinking about when the incident unfolded. He never knew the true cause of his mother's great change in the end. However, he was sure that what she saw in the mirror was not true. Fan Qianshi must have twisted the facts and made her see something else. Di Hao became an orphan ever since he was only a baby, so he never got to know his parents in person. However, he believed that his mother would not kill Di Fui. Some sort of spell must have been controlling her until Di Fui's blood disarmed the limits to her power, possibly enabling her to take back control of herself. However, when she finally regained her consciousness, the mistake had already been made. There was no way she could amend it. Chapter 2750. The Master of the Heavenly Law, 7. Di Hao became the next Master of the Heavenly Law. He finally learned about the responsibilities and realized how rebellious his father had been to keep his family safe. Nonetheless, he did not succeed. It seemed that their love was destined to end with heartbreak. Having grown and gained enormous power, he used a secret technique to find out about Fan Qianshi's history, which was the first time he really learned about the man's identity and his intention behind the plot. Initially, Di Hao believed that Fan Qianshi wanted to be with Gushijio, and that was the start of how all three of their lives came to an end. However, after knowing more about Fan Qianshi, it appeared that the only thing that he truly wanted was to become the master of the heavenly law. However, his lack of capability obstructed him from competing with Di Fui. Thus, he had to play dirty. Gushijio was only his tool, as she was the only one who could kill Di Fui. Many plans were set in place in this elaborate plot, and things slowly evolved to the point that he desired. Everything worked out well for him. He did not even need to expose himself or his true intention. The only thing that did not happen according to his plan was his death. He never thought that he would die in the hands of Di Fui first. In the very end, all was lost for Fan Qianshi. He achieved nothing from all his troubles. The yellow candlelight was diffused in the dark. There he sat, reminiscing about what happened to his parents. He could not help but heave a deep sigh of relief, for the venom in Lan Weihe's body was the key that led to his parents' tragic death. Without the venom, his sister, Di Xueyi, would not have died before she was born. His mother would not have suffered under the control of the evil spirit placed in her by Fan Qianshi. Di Hao managed to change many things after traveling through time by accident. For example, Fan Qianshi's identity was already exposed at such an early stage. Furthermore, the primary and secondary venom had not taken shape to cause any harm. Even his father had regained his memory as Di Fui in advance, and was no longer the innocent little Nianma of the past. Finally, his parents had completely talked themselves out of their misunderstandings. Although his mother once had contact with Lan Weihu and was affected by the evil aura, it was nothing serious. The evil aura was not enough to cause any harm to her body. The baby was still Di Xueyi, not some evil being. With half of the flood dragon's heart in his possession, everything was going to turn out well. Di Hao looked at his little hand in faint lights and started giggling. He was glad that his limited body size had not hindered his capability. He thought to himself that what he had accomplished was rather impressive. With that in mind, he rolled around comfortably in the sheets. However, another question struck him. If the course of history were to be changed completely, his parents would still be alive, so his father would remain as the master of the heavenly law. Perhaps he would not need to take on the responsibility and could be free to pursue whatever he wanted. It was the kind of future that he looked forward to. Just keep going, he thought to himself. When Di Hao was busy celebrating his milestone, Di Fui finally found the hidden devil in Gu Zijia's body. The devil was very well hidden by masking its evil power with Gu Zijia's spiritual aura. Also, its evil power had significantly been toned down to become as natural as her spiritual aura, so no one would realize its existence. The only noticeable difference was Gu Zijia's change of mood, but the symptom could easily be misread as part of pregnancy. Fortunately, the devil was still weak. In order for it to grow, it needed to absorb more energy from a strong man. Its need for a male had triggered Gu Zijia's sexual cravings. The two lovebirds had always been passionate about one another. Only this time, Gu Shijie was the desperate one. Di Fui was happy and baffled at the same time by his wife's sudden change. What surprised him was the decrease in his spiritual power every time they had sex. Anyone would easily overlook the slight decline, but not Di Fui. Being an acute observer, he noticed the difference the third time they had sex. When they were nearing the climax of their lovemaking, Di Fui purposely observed the condition of her body, and finally caught a slight movement of the evil being. The devil was quietly absorbing his yang energy from his body. The thing seemed to be already alive. It seemed to have noticed Di Fui's suspicion, so it immediately withdrew itself to avoid being discovered. Chapter 2751. Luring the evil spirit, Di Fui quietly checked her body, but could not find it. What's wrong? Gu Shijie asked, with her eyes locked on him. Gu Shijie had been undergoing a phase of insecurity, so she was sensitive like a kitten. She could easily notice when Di Fui did not seem right. Di Fui smiled and dragged her back down on the bed again. Nothing. I am just afraid of hurting the baby, so I wanted to check that it was all right. The man had to be cautious as it was possible that the evil spirit could hear his conversation with her. To be safe, he could not mention the matter to her right now. He had to try to expel the evil energy from her body quietly. After lying down for some time, Gu Shijie fell asleep in his arms. On the other hand, Di Fui could not fall asleep. He simply looked at the woman in his arms and wondered about the origin of this evil energy. If he were not mistaken, this evil energy was related to the mother-child venom. It seemed that she was somehow contaminated. However, he had to lock down its position before making a plan. Naturally, he needed to have sex again in order to do so. Therefore, after Gu Shijie woke up, she found that Di Fui was looking at her naughtily. After all, they were husband and wife who had been doing this for a long time. By just looking at him, she immediately knew what he wanted to do. She could not help but wonder how hungry the man was for sex. It was not that long ago since they last had it. Nonetheless, she would not turn him down. This time, Di Fui did not get any results from their lovemaking session. The evil energy was missing. Di Fui sneered in his heart. Did the evil spirit think that it could fight against him? Or perhaps, it already had its fill for now. Since this evil energy needed its yang qi, Di Fui thought that it would dry it out for 2 days. Di Fui wanted to withhold its energy from being consumed by the evil energy, but he did not intend to hold back from satisfying his wife. She would certainly get suspicious. Therefore, Di Fui told Gu Shijie that he would like to practice a particular skill, which was useful for dealing with Fan Qianshi. Gu Shijie naturally agreed to that as she believed that Fan Qianshi was a major threat to the universe and them. 2 days were not long, but for Gu Shijie, it was somehow a bit difficult. She was not in the mood to do anything and did not feel very energetic at all. She always thought about him uncontrollably. She never thought that such a short separation would make her suffer so much. It almost felt like she was facing withdrawal symptoms from cigarette addiction. She was restless, and she finally realized that something was not right. Her temperament had always been free and easy. When did she become so small-hearted? She could not even control her emotions and felt as if some other soul possessed her. She subconsciously checked her body but found nothing. What could explain her sudden change in behavior? Gu Shijie knocked on her own forehead a few times against a wall, as she simply could not figure it out. When she was feeling dizzy, the directed audio spell on her waist suddenly lit up. She was somewhat irritated and picked up hastily. "Who is it?" She sounded a bit rude. The caller on the other side snorted. A child's voice sounded. "Mother? How air?" Gu Shijie sighed, and her voice softened after that. "How air, you are okay? Where are you?" "Mother, I hunted something precious. Wait for me to go back and pass it to you." "Did something happen to you? You sounded rather annoyed earlier. Did you quarrel with father?" This kid was always very sensitive, so it was so easy for him to detect her change of emotions. Gu Shijie took a deep breath and felt apologetic. Chapter 2752. Luring the Evil Spirit, 2. This kid was so young. She should be the one who was concerned about him. However, it was always her son who cared about her. Perhaps she was really incompetent as a mother. "No, baby. I am all right." "What about father?" "He is isolating himself to practice some new skill, but he will come back soon." She chatted a bit with her son through the directed audio spell, but suddenly heard some noise from the other side as if many monsters were screaming. What happened? Did her son go to a monster's nest? Di Hao cursed in his heart before quickly saying to his mother, "Mother, I will talk to you again when I am back. Let me settle them first." Di Hao was so frustrated. After he retrieved half of the heart of the flood dragon, he tried to rush back, but he did not expect so many passing monsters to be attracted to it because of its richness in spiritual power. When he was holding it, it felt like grasping the meat of Monk Tang in the story of Journey to the West. Along the way, he had been attacked by at least 17 or 18 monsters. Even strange birds had rushed toward him from above. At that point, there were colorful lights condensed in his palm. Simultaneously, he had a murderous look on his face indicating that he was ready to kill anything and anyone that stood in his way. Had these creatures and monsters overlooked his abilities because he was a kid? He wanted to give them a lesson that they would never forget. When the directed audio spell was hung up, Gu Shijie was stunned for a moment. She was already at the level of great deity, so she had encountered countless monsters in her life. Therefore, she no longer feared the sound of roaring creatures. However, this time, when she heard the monsters coming after her son, her heart suddenly shook, and her stomach suddenly growled. She had an inexplicable desire to rush over to him and catch a few fierce beasts to eat. Was this something that pregnant women would normally face? It was normal for them to crave certain things and feel uneasy if they were not satisfied. All of a sudden, Gu Shijie felt very warm at home. and her throat was parched. She quickly went out as she wanted to take in some fresh air. There was a big lake in the Biwu Palace that was rich in spiritual power, as well as aquatic animals. There were certainly countless rare and delicious fish inside the pond. Gu Shijio stood on the bridge over the lake for a moment. She then leaned over to watch the fish under the bridge. It used to be a pleasant and calming sight for her, but now she only felt hungry. She tried to suppress the desire but failed, so she just jumped into the lake. Mu Feng and the gang had been secretly watching her, and they were so shocked to see what she just did. The lake was definitely cold and not suitable for swimming. To make matters worse, Gu Shijio was pregnant. Mu Feng almost jumped in as well, but all of a sudden he quickly retreated. In the lake, Gu Shijio had already taken off her clothes and only floated on the surface of the water with her innerwear holding 2 large crabs with claws in her hands. The big crabs were 8 times the size of a typical river crab. They were like 2 small round tables struggling in Gu Zhijia's hands. Unfortunately, Gu Shijio was not very careful, so her hand was hurt by their claws, and her fingers bled. She originally wanted to bring the crabs up on shore and get someone to steam it for her. Nonetheless, after being hurt by the crab, she was so angry that she pulled off the crab's claws in anger. Gu Shijio looked at the tender red flesh inside the claw and could not control herself anymore. She wanted to suck on the crab at once. Shijio. Gu Shijio was stunned when someone called her from the shore. A figure appeared next to her. Gu Shijio looked up and saw Difui in purple clothes. She was happy and rushed to him. Fui. You finally came out of isolation. Chapter 2753. Luring the Evil Spirit 3. Gu Shijio was still holding the giant crabs in her hand, so when she rushed out from the depths of the lake, the big claws on one of the crabs almost poked Difui's face. Swiftly, Difui waved his sleeves, and the 2 crabs suddenly appeared on the shore. While he reached for her hand and pulled her out, he used some spiritual power to dry her hair and clothes. Do you feel like eating crabs? I can cook it for you. Let's go back first. He then took her back into the residence. Difui's cooking had improved significantly of late. He cooked the 2 big crabs personally and added some rare spices to the crab meat before asking her to eat them slowly. The crab meat was cold in nature and not suitable for pregnant women. However, the special spices somehow neutralized the meat, so that it would not harm her if she had some. To be honest, the crab cooked by Difui was very delicious, but Gu Shijio had no appetite after eating 2 mouthfuls. It seemed that she would prefer to have raw meat instead, just like before, when she had ripped off one of the claws of the crab she captured. When she realized this, she was shocked. She suddenly remembered Lan Weihe's case, and recalled that Yanqing used to say that after the venom had infected Lan Weihu, she was also very thirsty for meat. Could it be that she had a child venom fetus in her belly? The thought shocked her, and the piece of crab in her hand fell to the ground. What's wrong? Difui held her hand and asked. Gu Zhijia's face was a little bit pale. Fui, am I pregnant with a child venom fetus? The baby in my stomach. The thought of it was too scary that she did not dare not say it out loud. Difui grabbed her waist. Why would you say so? My dear, you have overthought. It cannot hide from me if it is a child venom fetus. Your baby is well, and there is nothing wrong. Gu Shijio was slightly relieved but was not fully at ease. I feel that something is wrong. She then explained her realizations from the past few days. Difui listened to her and let her finish. Then he smiled and said, I have asked for advice from a few midwives. It is normal for a pregnant lady to have a variety of strange reactions. Everything that you have mentioned so far is normal. Don't overthink it. But why do I crave for you as though I am craving for a cigarette? Well, that proves that we are really in love, and we can't live without each other. Baby, I am very pleased. Difui smiled and pulled her in his arms. Speedily he then kissed on her lips. Gu Shijio pushed him away. You are not taking this seriously. Her eyebrows furrowed in frustration. She could not explain why she absolutely missed the man when he was away, but felt normal again when he was back by her side. She snuggled in his arms and looked at his handsome face. All of a sudden, she seemed to slobber and wanted to eat him. She felt like she had become a female wolf. Fortunately, this was her husband. She could eat him whenever she wanted to. Gu Shijie raised her hand and wrapped it around his neck. Then, she sat on his lap and playfully bit his ear. Seconds later, she exhaled a warm breath into his ear and said softly, "Celestial Master Zhua, do you want me?" Based on her body language and actions, it was completely believable that she would choose to rape him if he did not comply. Stupid. Of course I want you. You are my wife. Come on, eat some crab meat. I am hungry. This crab foot is mine. After scooping the crab meat for her, he started to lick it. Was he serious? Gu Shijie was rendered speechless by his response to her advances. Chapter 2754, Luring the Evil Spirit 4. Since Di Fui was enjoying the crab, she did not want to interrupt him and decided to practice patience. He left for 2 days, and he didn't even miss me. Is he getting tired of me? When she suddenly came up with this thought, she was shocked. When did she become so desperate? She was even more desperate than a housewife. Although she knew that she was overthinking, she found that she could not control her feelings and emotions. Nonetheless, Gu Shijie did not want to look like a fool, so she decided to suppress the negative thoughts. After some time, it seemed that Di Fui genuinely did not miss her. He was chatting with her about everything under the sun, but never mentioned to bring her back to the bedroom. Gu Shijie became more and more anxious, and finally, she could not help it. She rushed to him and pulled his robes. She almost drooled as she shouted, "Fui, I want you. Now." Immediately. Di Fui was speechless. He raised his hand and held her little paw that was burning. "Okay, let's go back to the bedroom." It was unsatisfying sex for Gu Shijie. There was no other way to say it. Di Fui was particularly bad today. He seemed to be deliberately torturing her. Every time it reached a critical time on the bed, he would turn off the fire. As she was not satisfied, she almost turned violent. But just at that moment, Herbali was suddenly in pain. She could not help but moan as she took a deep breath and curved her body. "What are you doing?" Di Fui worked so hard that the evil energy finally reappeared. He took the chance and wanted to expel it out of her body entirely. However, he did not think that Gu Shijie would suffer from such agonizing pain before he could do it. Perhaps, the evil spirit could not be separated from her body. It seemed to have rooted itself in her soul. Because of his failed attempt to lure it out, the evil spirit quickly hid again, and did not re-emerge. Gu Shijie finally got the satisfaction she longed for, and fell asleep. Meanwhile, Di Fui's heart was sinking as he lay next to her on the bed. This evil energy in her body was more difficult to deal with than the child venom fetus in Lan Wei's body. That child venom fetus could be easily removed using his spiritual power, but the one in Gu Zijie's body was like a hedgehog, and he had no idea how to take it out. Furthermore, this evil energy seemed to be attached to her womb. Once it was pulled, it could cause pain in her abdomen, and would even hurt her unborn fetus. For the moment, Di Fui did not dare to do anything. However, he could not let this go on for too long as the evil energy in her body would be growing stronger and stronger. It was only a matter of time before it would take control of her mind and body. But what should he do? His fingers stroked her delicate face, and his eyes fell on her abdomen. This baby was very precious to her, and he knew it. Of course, he cared about the baby as well, and wanted it to be healthy. Nonetheless, if he had to, he would abort the baby to save Gu Shijie. Was Xueyi destined to be aborted? 2 days later, Di Fui had used all the ways he knew to expel the evil spirit, but it seemed to have been deeply rooted in Gu Zijie's body. Now and then, Di Fui would even notice a red light in Gu Zijie's eyes. Perhaps, the evil spirit was using her eyes to observe its surroundings. Di Fui knew that it was time to make a decision. Otherwise, it was going to be too late. To try to start the conversation, he thought that it would be suitable to bring her out for a walk. The sunshine in the garden was just right, so Di Fui decided to bring her to the garden. "Fui, is something troubling you?" Gu Shijie was still very sensitive to him. Di Fui looked down slightly when he heard her question. He took a deep breath and sighed. "Shijie, this baby." He wanted to tell her that the baby needed to be aborted, but before he could do so, There was noise from outside the residence, and a small figure rushed in hastily. Father! Mother! I am back! It was a little Dihao. He looked somewhat disheveled, his little robes were not tied properly, and one of his boots was missing. However, his pair of bright eyes still greeted them with faint excitement. Mother, I have brought you a big gift. You will be very pleased with it. Chapter 2755. It felt its shell was somewhat cold. There was a white jade plate on a white jade table with a big piece of meat. The meat was about the size of a small round table, and looked like half of a heart that was still bright red in color. It was still pulsating rhythmically when they laid eyes on it. Gu Shijio looked at the bloody meat, and then looked at her son's dirty face. However, this is the heart of a flood dragon. Mom, do you like it? Dihao looked up at her, and waited for praise. I like. Gu Shijio never expected this to be the so-called big gift from her son. Of course, she did not dislike it. After all, her son was so young and still brought a gift back for her. She was delighted but just did not expect the kid to bring back such a strange item. He actually took out the heart of a creature. Gu Shijio had seen a lot of dragons in the course of her existence, and many died by her hand. Nonetheless, she only heard a dragon's heart could improve one's spiritual power. Was it so tasty to consume? Had her son brought it back for her to cook? Anyway, since it was brought back by her son, she would surely entertain his request. Therefore, she pulled up her sleeves and was ready to cook it. However, this probably came from a large dragon, right? It was excellent that you could hunt it down. So how do you want to eat it? I think it can be made into more than a dozen types of dishes. Dihao remained silent. Something smells so good. What is so fragrant? The muscle and Luwu rushed over from a distance. When they saw the big heart on the table, they squinted at it. It is such a huge heart. It looks so juicy and tender. Master, you can certainly bake a lot of skewers with such a big heart. Master, let's grill it. It must taste very nice. I think roasting the muscle would also be very delicious. Dihao smiled slightly and circled around the muscle. Its meat is tender. Other than roasting, we can also cook another pot of soup. The muscle was speechless. It felt that the clamshell suddenly turned cold. It shrunk and weakly said, I am too old. My meat is also very, very old. How old are you? The muscle straightened its chest to reply. More than 10,000 years old. Well, you are just over 10,000 years old. As compared to the 100,000-year-old flood dragon, your meat is still considered tender. What's more, the meat of a muscle is always tender. Since you have been practicing for so long, I bet your meat must be extra nutritious. While walking around it, Dihao stared at the muscle as if it was his next meal. The muscle wanted to cry in fear. It pitifully said, Master, I have to practice. I need to leave first. It pulled Lu Wu and ran away immediately. The little guy was too ferocious. The muscle only wanted a small piece of meat from the large heart, but apparently, the boy wanted to trade that meat for its entire body. Gu Shijio was surprised. However, did you say that the owner of this dragon heart is 100,000 years old? Well, it is 100,000 years old exactly, and it is still a white dragon that has never killed anyone while practicing its immortality. Gu Shijio was stunned. Was it turning into a dragon? Difui suddenly asked. Yes, when I went. It had already turned to be 3/4 of a dragon. It almost ascended. Gu Shijio was speechless again. She felt a little sympathetic to the flood dragon. It was not easy to practice for so many years. Furthermore, it had to refrain from killing as well. A flood dragon's nature was typically savage and cruel. Most of them had dark practices. It was really rare to encounter such a pure breed. Nonetheless, it was unfortunate for the dragon that it had to meet her son. Chapter 2756. He liked the feeling of having a family. However, there are things that a gentleman should and shouldn't do. If it is an evil dragon, you kill it for the people. However, it was not right for you to kill this dragon. Gu Shijio thought that she had to educate her kid to be kind, and perhaps to be less ferocious. After all, his father was the master of the heavenly law. Mother, I did not kill it. I took only half of its heart, and gave it an elixir to expedite its recovery. Although it failed to ascend this time, it only needs another 5,000 years to have the chance again. Gu Shijio breathed a sigh of relief, but still felt that it was inappropriate for him to do so. She still felt the need to correct him. It is not easy to practice. And you did all this just to satisfy a craving? She scanned Di Hao again just to check if he had any hidden reason for doing so. She pulled him over and checked his pulse. Did the dragon injure you? There was no doubt that Gu Shijio was a skilled physician. Just by checking his pulse, she could immediately tell that something was not right with her son. She frowned and commented, "However, your spiritual power seems to have been exhausted. Moreover, there are internal injuries in several of your veins. Honestly, I would have preferred you not to give me this gift and to take better care of your health." "Okay, Mom. You are right. I won't do it anymore." Di Hao obediently leaned his head in her arms. Feeling his mother's love for him was truly an amazing experience. Even though she was nagging at him, it was so much better than being alone and unloved. Di Fui looked at his well-behaved son and raised his hand to pull him over. He used a cleaning spell on him and straightened the boy out in a flash. "Di Hao, remember one sentence. As a man, you need to be responsible for everything. You have to keep your clothes clean and tidy. Also, try not to let your family worry about you." One could easily feel worried for him just by looking at his attire. Then Di Fui took out a pair of shoes from his storage space and threw them beside Di Hao's feet. "Try it." Di Hao's eyes lit up as he placed his little feet into the shoes. The size seemed to be perfect. Obviously, this was what Di Fui prepared for him. For once, Di Hao managed to feel what it was like to have parents that loved him. Di Hao was satisfied and felt that all of his labor had paid off. He liked the feeling of having a family. Once he could tell that the boy was all right, Di Fui shifted his attention back to the heart that was lying on the table. Even though he did not have the memory and knowledge of the master of the heavenly law, he still sensed the unusualness of this heart that belonged to a flood dragon. There seemed to be a purity to it that was uncanny. After that, he turned his attention back to Gu Shijio. At this moment, she seemed calm and free. Although she was also curious about the heart that was in front of her, her temperament seemed to have returned to normal. Had this heart somehow managed to purify her? Di Fui's heartbeat quickened as he pondered on the outcome. He looked at his son again and realized that his son would not hunt for the dragon's heart for no reason. Could it be that Di Hao was also looking at him? When their eyes met, Di Hao blinked at him to confirm the correctness of his thoughts. All this was communicated without a single word being uttered. Di Fui quietly pulled Gu Shijio to his side and wanted her to sit on his lap. However, Gu Shijio snuck her way out of his embrace. She did not want to be too physical in front of her kid. Her actions stirred his heart again as he recalled how clingy she had been over the past few days. Then, Di Fui reached out his fingers and touched the heart that was on the table. He seemed to feel something and smirked. Gu Shijio wondered what he felt at that moment. She looked at his face and then looked back at the dragon's heart and asked, "What is inside this heart?" Chapter 2757. Trust him. There is. It actually. Di Fui seemed to have been caught off guard by Gu Zijia's question, as he was distracted by the dragon's heart. He found Gu Zijia's curiosity almost overwhelming at this critical point. Gu Zijia's curiosity was not unjustified. In fact, ever since she laid eyes on this treasure, she seemed to have been subconsciously more alert. A voice seemed to warn her to keep her distance from it. Therefore, although she found it intriguing, she was also rather cautious about getting too close. Nonetheless, seeing how Di Fui had reacted to it had pushed her curiosity across the line. She took a few steps closer to it and asked, "What's it inside?" "There is. Why don't you personally touch it? It is shocking." Gu Shijio was still hesitant to come over. "It is just half of a dragon's heart. What is so shocking about it? Baby, this is not an ordinary dragon's heart. I remember that you talked about the journey to the west, saying that Monk Tang was a good man who had 10 years of practice. He was the reincarnation of a golden monk, right? Therefore, by just eating one piece of his meat, one can be immortal. This dragon had practiced for 100,000 years. Its meat was more magical than the meat of Monk Tang. By just touching it like this. Difui's sudden change of expression showed that he was very surprised when he touched it. Difui had seen countless treasures before. There was almost nothing that could make him have such an expression today. Hence, Gu Shizhou's curiosity had inflated all the way up. Given that she knew that Difui would not harm her, she went over and put her finger onto it. The heart was slightly warm, which was the first feeling that she sensed upon touching it. She did not feel anything special, except for the fact that she was inexplicably nervous. Subconsciously, she wanted to retract her hand, but Difui grasped her. Come on. To feel the effect, press in this way and use the purification technique I taught you before. You will feel its difference. He separated her 5 fingers and placed them in the 5 veins of the heart. Meanwhile, Gu Shizhou followed his instructions and used the purification technique that she learned from him. Pump, pump, pump. Her heart suddenly jumped fiercely. She felt a hot stream of energy rushing into her body through her 5 fingers. Its first destination was straight into her limbs, followed by her tight belly. This sudden rush of energy triggered something in her belly and made her feel as if something was unwilling to leave. All of a sudden, she could feel it pulling on her stomach. Naturally, Gu Zijia's first instinct was to worry about her baby. She was afraid of losing her daughter, so she wanted to withdraw her hand and stop the entire process. As she lifted her hand, Gu Shizhou could feel that the pain in her belly immediately stopped. It was a relief to her. Shizhou, do you trust me? She heard Difui's calm and authoritative voice. Gu Shizhou was stunned by his question but answered without hesitation. Yes. Good. Listen to me and continue what you were doing. But my stomach hurts from the practice. I'm afraid that our baby. Do not worry. Listen to me. What I want you to do now is going to protect our baby. Although Gu Shizhou did not know why Difui was so nervous, she was also aware that something was not quite right within herself. Therefore, she took a deep breath and agreed. All right. She closed her eyes, trying to ignore the sudden resistance in her brain, and continued to exercise her power. It was a glamorous setting with jade and corals scattered everywhere. Some pearls were bright like a light, swaying on the branches of the greenery in the area. The road was not paved in stone but a particular blue jade. It was shiny and lustrous, making the golden halo of the pearl reflect on the floor like a shining star. There was a peculiar palace in the middle surrounded by clouds. By just looking at it, it felt like the palace was above all else, making people naturally want to worship it when they saw it. Chapter 2758. Did you fail this time? It seemed to be auspicious, but simultaneously also felt slightly murderous as a faint black gas was emitted at the top of the palace. At this moment, a person was sitting in the palace wearing a black robe. His eyes were beautiful like flowers, but his face was cold. There was a big cauldron in front of him, and there was a bright red liquid rolling around in the pot. From time to time, a faint black gas emerged from the liquid, and it seemed to be drawn into a black mirror in front of him. The mirror had a rather complex design that seemed to be triggered by the black gas that was drawn into it. Quietly, a woman fluttered into the palace and stood quietly behind him. The man in black seemed to be unresponsive to her presence. Perhaps he was unaware that she had entered the palace. Either that or he trusted the woman behind him, so he continued his practice involving the mirror. The woman's eyes fell on the mirror and shone slightly. She recognized the people inside the mirror. They were Gu Shizhou, Difui, and their kid. The 3 of them looked like a very warm family, which made her envious. Her eyes then fell on the fingers of the man in black. It seemed that his fingertips also appeared to have turned black. Moreover, his face was pale, and his forehead was sweaty, which depicted that what he was doing consumed a lot of energy and effort from the man. Quietly, she bit her lips and continued to look into the mirror. She saw Gu Zijia's hand on a strange bloody flesh, and she seemed to be doing something to it as well. Meanwhile, her husband, Difui, hugged her in his arms. His palms were pressed on her back, which looked like he was helping her to exercise some power. Fan Qianshi frowned at the sight. At the same time, more black gas seemed to be churned out of the cauldron while the sweat on his forehead was oozing out more promptly too. It was obviously that the man was neutralizing what Di Fui and Gu Shijie were doing. Stop. Stop. Leave this bloody flesh. It will harm your baby. It will make you lose your baby. Gu Shijie, stop it. Fan Qianshi was threatening Gu Shijie every second. The message seemed to be communicated to her through the black gas that was entering the mirror. From her reaction seen in the mirror, Fan Qianshi could tell that Gu Shijie could hear him. Her fingers trembled slightly, but her lips were closed tightly. Instead of pulling away, she grew more and more certain of what she needed to do. The battle lasted for an hour, and by then, the woman next to Fan Qianshi noticed that the dragon's heart on the table had shrunk noticeably. The woman squinted her eyes in shock. It would appear that Gu Shijie had absorbed the energy from the piece of flesh. Boom! The copper cauldron in front of Fan Qianshi suddenly exploded. The mirror in front of him also instantly dissipated in the air. Right at that moment, a golden light that emerged from the air and hit Fan Qianshi. The man snorted, and his body trembled fiercely. He spat out a mouthful of blood by the sheer force that struck him. How can this happen? Why? It should not have failed. They should not have been able to expel this ancient magic. What was that flesh on the table? Fan Qianshi was mumbling to himself as he was too stunned by the broken pieces of the copper cauldron and blood scattered on the floor. In a state of shock and disbelief, he talked to himself for some time while the woman behind him stayed silent like a shadow. Yin Er, can you tell me what was the piece of flesh on the table? The woman looked down at him and replied. It looked like a heart. Did you fail this time? Her tone was flat, indicating her nonchalance to his failure. Fan Qianshi's fingers clenched together tightly as he coldly said, "This is a temporary failure. In any case, I must achieve my goal. My identity has already been exposed. Once he is back to his place, death would await us." The woman did not speak any further. Fan Qianshi took a deep breath and stood up. He muttered, "We must think of other ways to get them." His eyes fell on the woman, and he suddenly asked, "Yin Er, do you despise me?" The woman shook her head. "Yin Er belongs to you. No matter what you do, I have no regrets." Fan Qianshi was satisfied with her response and patted her shoulder. "It is ideal for you to think this way. By the way, I have made a new body for you to reincarnate in." Chapter 2759. How can you compare yourself to her? How is the body that you currently occupy? Fan Qianshi's hand fell on her wrist to check her pulse. The woman's body went slightly stiff. She looked down at her wrist and answered, "Thanks, master. Everything is well." Fan Qianshi looked at her for a moment and sighed. "You still hate me." Wu Wuyan bit her lips. "I don't hate you. I am just confused." After she was reborn, she was like a piece of wood. Although she was very obedient, she seemed to have lost all emotions. Fan Qianshi tempted her several times, but she did not say a word. It was rare for her to ask questions, but Fan Qianshi wanted to know how she felt. "Ask me anything." "Master, you once said that Gu Shijie was your piece of work, like me. We are all your chess pieces. However, she has always betrayed you. Yet you are still very polite to her. If you can treat me like her. Who are you? How can you compare yourself to her?" Fan Qianshi's cold voice interrupted her midway through her sentence. Wu Wuyan was stunned and subsequently looked down. She calmly replied, "You're right. I have crossed the line. I am only your chess piece. I will remember my role from now on." Fan Qianshi looked at her and realized that he had gone overboard. He suspected that it was probably because of the failure he just experienced, which made his mood somewhat unstable. He sighed before continuing, "Yin Er, I did not mean that. What I wanted to say is that you and Gu Shijie have your own abilities and strengths. You don't have to compare yourself to her." "Yes, I will learn to accept this fact. Can I ask another question?" "Okay. Is Gu Zijie's soul different from mine?" I was surprised that she could become a great deity in such a short period of time. Master, you have tried to control her several times, and even wiped away her memory, but always failed. From what I know, your technique of wiping one's memory has never failed before, except for Gushijio. Her soul is so powerful, so I naturally feel that the two of us are not alike. Fan Qianshi paused for a moment before he calmly said, She is made by me using some special means. Thus she is naturally much stronger. She is already out of your control. Why don't you make another soul that is as strong as her, but more obedient? Wu Wuyan blurted out. Fan Qianshi frowned. She can't be copied. Her soul is not. When he said that, he suddenly stopped and looked coldly at Wu Wuyan. Yan Er, are you trying to test me? Wu Wuyan bit her lips and bowed. Master, you have overthought. I am just wondering. If you are worried, you can wipe away Almi memory in this aspect. Fan Qianshi stared at her for a moment, and finally he laughed. He then spoke in a soft and gentle voice. Yan Er, you have been with me for so many years. You are always loyal, so I am not worried about you. Alright, let's not discuss it anymore. What happened last time has caused you some injuries and unhappiness. I want to compensate you. Tell me, what do you want? Wu Wuyan shook her head. I don't need anything. Fan Qianshi looked at her and spoke slowly. Yan Er, there is no need to hide anything from me. Do you like long sai? Wu Wuyan suddenly looked up at Fan Qianshi. Master, you don't have to hide it. I can understand if you like him because he used to be my clone. You liking him is the equivalent of you liking me. I will not blame you. Chapter 2760. Don't move. Wu Wuyan looked down at the ground, unable to summon the courage to look at Fan Qianshi. Master, I admit that I have a special feeling toward him, but it is only because he is your clone. I have no other intention or motive. Fan Qianshi put his palm on her shoulder before continuing. You don't have to be afraid. I don't blame you. The reason why I asked is that I really want to fulfill your wish. A woman deserves a good family. Don't worry. After I eliminate Difui, I will personally help you to put together the wedding. Wu Wuyan lowered her head and answered coldly. Thank you, Master. Fan Qianshi nodded. Yan Er, as long as you are faithful, I will always care about you and make sure that you will have a good family. However, Long Sai doesn't have much feeling towards you yet. You still have to try to get close to him and earn his feelings the right way. After all, a twisted melon is not sweet. Wu Wuyan remained silent for a moment before responding. All right. I will follow whatever you arrange for me. Then she looked at the debris on the floor and subconsciously wanted to clean up. However, Fan Qianshi waved his hand to stop her. It's fine. You can go back first. Obediently, Wu Wuyan left Fan Qianshi alone in the hall. Fan Qianshi looked at the debris on the floor, and there was a trace of pain in his eyes. He lowered his body and cleaned the debris little by little, without using any spell. It seemed like he was cleaning the mess as a way to calm himself down. All of a sudden, he stumbled upon a big piece of debris on the ground. He picked it up and seemed to see a woman's face through all the dust. His fingers slowly gripped the article tightly, and it pierced into his palm, forcing blood down from his fingers. He closed his eyes slightly and looked down at the ground in dismay. Shijio. Master, I will make you regret the way you treated me. Inside the Biwu Palace, Gu Shijio was still startled by the dried piece of meat on the table. It was initially of a substantial size, but now, it was the size of a teacup. Also, it was no longer exuding any aura from it like before. She looked at her own hands again, and wondered if she had absorbed the energy from the dragon's heart. Shijio, how do you feel? Mother, how do you feel? Di Fui and Di Hao asked their question at almost the same time. Subconsciously, Gu Shijio curled and stretched her fingers and toes. Then she tried to run a bit of spiritual power through her body. There is nothing wrong with me. In fact, I feel that my spiritual power has increased substantially. Di Fui pulled her over and said, Let me see. He placed his palm on her lower abdomen. Gu Shijio was forced to sit on his knees, so that he could assess her situation better. Di Fui took the opportunity to hug his wife from behind, as Di Hao watched her with his big round eyes. He noticed that his mother's face had turned slightly reddish. She was rarely shy, but it seemed she felt uncomfortable with public displays of affection in front of Difui. She coughed a little to signal him to keep a distance. As expected, Difui merely tightened his grip on her. "Don't move." Gu Zijia's heart was pounding as she seemed to realize something. "Okay, I won't move." She looked at her son again as she was still quite embarrassed. "How your father is diagnosing me." "I understand." Dihao blinked his eyes and put a smile on his face. He knew that his mother was shy about what was happening. After a moment, Difui finally let go of her and breathed a sigh of relief. "Finally, it is successful. How you did an excellent job this time." Dihao trusted his father's medical advice. He replied, "I was truly lucky enough to find the flood dragon in time to get this over to help both of you." Difui raised his hand and rubbed his son's head. "I am fortunate to have such a good son." Gu Shijio silently listened to the males exchanging pleasantries and grew frustrated. She thought about what they had said for a moment, and then tapped the table with a finger. Finally, she asked, "Can the two of you stop praising each other and explain to me what just happened?" You're tuning in to the Li Mei's Wuxia Whispers YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.